certain shloka, composed by Sri Svarapuri Nimai Pandit said to him, by way of fun, that the verb in the said verse should have the form of Parasmapada and not of Atmanpada. Thereafter, when Nimai Pandit next made his appearance another day, Sri Svarapuri told him that he had been able to find out the grammatical authority in favor of his conjugation of the verb as Atmanpada. The Lord also, in order to enhance the greatness of his devotee, refrained from finding fault with this conclusion. Having passed some time in the pleasures of these learned pastimes in the company of Nimai, Sri Svarapuri started again on his wanderings in order to sanctify the tirthas all over India by his visit. The above account of Sri Chaitanya's first meeting with his guru is reproduced verbatim from Sri Chaitanya Bhagavata. Sri Svarapuri made his appearance in a Brahmana family of Kumarhata, Halishahar, on the E.B. Rai. He was the most beloved disciple of Sri Madhavendra Puri. In Chaitanya Charitamrita it is narrated, Antya, v. 26-29, how Sri Svarapuri obtained the mercy of his Guru Deva by his loyal service, who bestowed on his worthy disciple his own love for Krishna. The unique love of Sri Svarapuri for Krishna, which was aroused in him in this manner, never left him. Sri Svarapuri wore the garb of a sannyasin of one staff, the staff being the symbol of self-discipline. The assumption of the single staff is the practice of those sannyasins who follow the path of knowledge to obtain the reward of the sixfold endeavors, viz. Sama, equanimity, Dhamma, self-control, Titiksha, endurance, etc. By the study of the Vedanta and the other scriptures. Those who follow the path of fruitive works on attainment of the stage of yati take to the triple staff sannyas and wander about companionless in all directions. The Vaishnava sannyasins, discarding alike the desire for worldly enjoyment as well as renunciation of such enjoyment, engage in the exclusive service of Hari. In them, therefore, the twin renunciation of worldly enjoyment and renunciation of such renunciation are simultaneously present. Their position is thus defined in Srimad Bhagavatam. I shall cross the otherwise impassable ocean of ignorance by serving the feet of Godhead by practicing devotion to the Supreme Soul in the footsteps of the great sages, rishis, of old. The rasa, i.e., mellowing quality, of devotion to Krishna, in which Sri Svarapuri was established by the mercy of Sri Madhavendra, transcends all other rasas, mellownesses, by its supreme excellence and complete perfection. The transcendental rasas may have the forms of 1. Brahman bliss, i.e., the bliss of realizing the transcendent greatness of Godhead, 2. The bliss of serving Godhead as a person who is supreme ruler of the material and spiritual worlds, and 3. The highest bliss of serving Godhead as recipient of causeless loving devotion. The object of worship, pointed to by the above three methods of spiritual service, has been called in the scriptures the Brahman, Sri Narayana and Sri Krishna respectively. All these rasas, mellownesses, are located beyond the zone of operation of the triple qualities that permeate this material world, which find their way even to Kailasa, the abode of Siva. The worthlessness of the worldly rasas, tasty liquid, is due to the existence of plurality of the objects of worship. In the spiritual realm, in Vishnu who is full, indivisible, pure cognition, there is no possibility of such defect. In Krishna this spiritual service attains its highest fulfillment. Sri Svarapuri was loved by Krishna for his attachment to Sri Guru, the best beloved of Krishna. The author of Sri Chaitanya Bhagavata says that being most dearly loved by Krishna, Sri Svarapuri was necessarily kind to all jivas without distinction. Such universal kindness is never possible in those who do not serve Krishna. The unwillingness of Sri Gaur Sundar to comply with the express request of Sri Svarapuri to correct the defect of his book is not a display of insincere civility, which passes in the name of humility in this world. Krishna makes no difference between the highly skilled linguist and one who is ignorant of the alphabet. Krishna is ever more kind to him who possesses the greater inclination of service. Krishna, who knows the inmost thoughts of our hearts, is never guilty of mistaken partiality. Pedantic scholars devoid of love for Krishna only prove their own real ignorance by trying to find defect in the language of devotees. The ignorance of such scholars is exposed at every step by the mercy of the Lord of the Goddess of Learning in order to wean them from their suicidal hostility to the devotees of Krishna. This also serves to keep their scholars' pride low. All such vanity is the outcome of ignorance of Krishna, who is the truth absolute. All sinfulness and unwholesomeness is due to ignorance of the real truth in an aggravated form under the guise of pseudo-scholarship. As professor, the Lord was wholly occupied with his studies, teaching and learned disputations. It was specially his practice to test the knowledge of all the teachers without exception. No professor of Nabadwap ever came victoriously through his searching tests. No one was ever able to give a satisfactory answer to the questions put by him. Although Nimai Pandit taught only Vyakarana, which is a comparatively elementary subject, he showed very little deference to the most erudite professors of that celebrated emporium of learning. He often passed with a triumphant bearing through all quarters of the town in the company of his students, displaying the aggressive nonchalance of the perfectly self-conceited scholiast. One day, as Nimai Pandit was thus parading the town with his students, he met Mukunda on his way, quite by accident. The Lord took him by the hand and said, "Why do you bolt at the very sight of me? I won't allow you to escape this time without being enlightened by you." Mukunda thought within himself, "I must beat him today. His special and only forte is Vyakarana. I shall silence him by asking questions about rhetoric that he may never again dare to be insolent to me." Accordingly, Mukunda began by deprecating Vyakarana as the Shastra fit only for children. "Let us discourse instead about rhetoric." The Lord said Mukunda might select any subject he liked. Mukunda thereupon began to quote the most difficult passages from the whole range of poetical literature and asked him to explain their rhetorical qualities. Sri Gaur Sundar impeached every metaphor and simile and all the rhetorical figures that were employed by those poets, and laid bare their defect in their minutest details. Mukunda was unable to justify his own select pieces against the penetrating criticisms of the Lord. The Lord then said laughingly, "Go home today. Look up your books with more care. I shall again examine you tomorrow. You should come early." Mukunda took the dust of the feet of the Lord and departed. He was amazed and began to reflect, is such learning possible in a mortal? There is no Shastra of which he is not perfect master. Gifted with such extraordinary genius, had he been only a devotee of Krishna, I would never leave his company even for the space of the fraction of a moment. Another day, in course of his peripatetic wanderings, the Lord of Vaikuntha fell in with Gadadhar. The Lord laughingly caught him by both hands and would not quit his hold of him. "You study Nyaya. Tell me something about it." Gadadhar replied, "Ask any question." The Lord said, "Tell me the characteristics of liberation, mukti." Gadadhar explained it in accordance with the Nyaya Shastra. The Lord said that the subject was not really explained. The position which Gadadhar took up was that of the Nyaya Shastra, according to which liberation, mukti, ensues on the cessation or destruction of the extreme miseries. The Lord of the Goddess of Learning found fault with the proposition in many ways. There is no disputant who can hold his ground against Godhead. As a matter of fact, there was not a single person in the whole of Nabadwap who could come up to the level of Nimai Pandit in learned disputations. Gadadhar now thought of saving his face by flight. The Lord said, "Gadadhar, go home today. I have more to learn from you, so do not fail to turn up early tomorrow." Gadadhar made his obeisance and went off. The Lord roamed through every part of the town in this manner. He was soon recognized by all persons as a most profound scholar. All people showed him the highest respect whenever they chanced to meet him. In the afternoon, the Lord proceeded to the side of the Ganges with all his students and sat on the bank with demonstrative joy. The beauty of the person of the Lord, who is served by Sri Lakshmi Devi herself, is unique in all the three worlds and inspired love in every beholder. The son of Sachi sat there in the midst of his disciples and expounded the Shastras. The Vaishnavas also gathered to the side of the Ganges in the evening and from a distance listened to the learned dissertations of the Lord. They experienced a mixed feeling of delight and sorrow as they thought within themselves that Nimai Pandit was, indeed, possessor of learning and beauty in an extraordinary measure. But if Krishna is not served thereby, those qualifications are of no use whatever. They also confided to one another the fact that they were in the habit of fleeing the very sight of him for fear of his puzzling hoaxes. Some complained that he also did not allow them to escape so easily, often holding them up with the peremptory authority of a customs officer. A few admitted that the Brahmana was possessed of superhuman powers and even suspected that it is a great personage, Mahapurusha, who had appeared in the world as Nimai Pandit. Although the Lord was constantly occupied in putting his puzzles to them, still the sight of him somehow always made those Vaishnavas feel very happy. They all realized that such learning was not to be found in man. But this discovery also added to their poignant grief that he did not serve Krishna. They implored one another to bless him that he might thereby attain to love for Krishna. All the Vaishnavas would prostrate themselves to the Supreme Lord on the bank of the Ganges, and all of them blessed him. "May it be thy pleasure, O Krishna, that the son of Jagannath be maddened by love for thee, giving up every other pleasure. May he constantly serve thee with loving devotion. Vouchsafe to us, O Krishna, him as our companion." The Lord, who knows the inmost thoughts of the heart, was aware of these wishes of the Vaishnavas. He made obeisance to them whenever he chanced to meet Srivas and any of the devotees. The Lord received the blessings of the devotees with his head bent in submission. By the blessings of the divinity, say the scriptures, love for Krishna is aroused. Some of them spoke to him plainly, why do you waste your time in the delusions of learning? Some said, look here, Nimai Pandit, what does it profit to be learned? Make haste to serve Krishna. Why do people read it is surely for the purpose of learning devotion to Krishna. If that is missed, what is the good of learning? The Lord smiled and answered, it is a great good fortune for me that such as you teach me to regard devotion to Krishna as essential. It seems to my mind that one whose welfare is sought by such as you is, indeed, most fortunate. I have a mind, after teaching my pupils for a little time longer, to betake myself to good Vaishnavas. Thus saying, the Lord, who found himself in the midst of his servants, would begin to laugh. No one could recognize him by the force of his own power. By such ways did the Lord captivate the minds of all persons. There was no one who did not long for the sight of him. The Lord's leisure was spent in these learned sessions by the side of the Ganges and wanderings through the different quarters of the town. The citizens greeted the feet of the Lord with the greatest affection no sooner they caught sight of him. The ladies said, he is the God of love manifest. May woman be blessed by obtaining this treasure at her every successive birth. The learned regarded him as the equal of the celestial sage Brihaspati, and the oldest of them made their obeisance to his lotus feet. To the yogis, he appeared to possess the realized body. The wicked viewed him with terror, as the very form of death. If the Lord greeted a person only once, he was thereby reduced to the condition of his prisoner and wore round his neck the collar of his love. Despite all the outspoken boastings of learning in which the Lord constantly indulged in the hearing of everybody, he was devotedly loved by all the people. Even the Yavanas displayed a great liking for the Lord, who is by nature mercifully disposed to all without exception. The Lord held his academy in the suite of rooms that led into the residence of the fortunate Mukunda Sanya. The son of Sri Sachi Devi engaged there in defending and opposing different interpretations and in refuting, justifying and expounding in endless ways the texts of the sutras. The fortunate Sanya, Mukunda with all his family and dependents felt themselves borne aloft on the high tide of a perennial joy, the cause of which they could not understand. After the day's triumphs of learning, the Lord returned home in the evening. Thus did the ruler of Vaikuntha choose to divert himself with the exquisite pastimes of learning. These accounts from the pen of Thakur Brindavandas leave on the mind a most vivid impression of the realities of the professor life of Sri Caitanya. He was evidently the universal favorite of both Hindus and Musalmans alike, and was feared by all the impious scholars and evildoers of every description. He was to all appearance the ideal householder teacher, absorbed in his studies and teaching, which were of a wholly secular character. He was also a most formidable controversialist and had a wonderful faculty of detecting and exposing weak points in the views of the leading scholars of the famous university town. The beauty of his person ravished every beholder. He showed the highest respect to the community of the Vaishnavas, although they happened to be the objects of persecution and ridicule by all classes of the people. But he showed very little disposition to listen to their discourses regarding Krishna. On the contrary, his genuine reverence for them did not prevent him from putting even to them his puzzling riddles of logic, the activity that he seemed to like best of all. So the Vaishnavas, although they had a genuine liking for him, were grieved by his engrossing devotion to trivial secular studies and apparently utter indifference to Krishna. But they nevertheless prayed to Krishna to bestow on him the fullest measure of love for him, that he might be a real companion to them. Chapter Z, Unrecognized Direct Manifestation. From the point that we reached in the previous chapter begin, with a staggering suddenness, the overwhelming series of direct manifestations which are also at first necessarily unrecognized. The beginning of this change is thus described by Thakur Sri Brindavandas. On a certain day the Lord, under pretense of nervous breakdown, manifested all the perturbations of loving devotion. All on a sudden he began to utter words that are not of this world, rolled on the ground, laughed and smashed the house. He spoke with a deep, loud voice, girded up his loins and beat all persons whom he chanced to find about him. His whole body repeatedly attained the state of suspended animation, and these fits of exclusiveness were so peculiar that they filled all beholders with terror. The friends came soon to learn the tidings of his supposed indisposition and turned up in a body. They busied themselves with devising the proper treatment of his mental derangement, for so it appeared to them to be. Budimanta Khan and Mukunda Sanya came to the house of the Lord with all members of their families. They applied to his head medicinal oils, technically known as Vishnu and Narayana oils. Everyone offered the kind of help that suggested itself to him. But the Lord does everything by his own uncontrolled will. How could he be cured by any external aid? The Lord shivered in every limb and gesticulated violently. His loud exclamations terrified everybody. The Lord said, I am the Lord of all the worlds. I uphold the world, whence my name is Vishwambhar. I am he, but no one knows me. With these words he begins to run at all the people to get hold of them. In this manner the Lord did disclose his own lordly nature under the guise of nervous malady. Yet no one understood, being prevented by his power. Some held that he was possessed by a demon. Others opined that it was the doing of witches. Some expressed the view that it was undoubtedly a case of madness as he manifested the symptom of talking incessantly. By these indications they failed to understand his real nature, being thus deluded by the power of the Lord. They applied various curative oils to his head and kept his body immersed in oil in a large vat. The Lord laughed without restraint as he lay afloat in oil, which gave all persons the impression that he had a very serious attack of the worst type of the disease. Having by his will sported for a while in this manner, the Lord regained his normal health by giving up the show of nervous malady. At this sudden recovery all people rent the sky with loud acclamations of the name of Hari. In their joy, they made lavish gifts of clothing in such huge quantities that it baffles all calculation. All the people were gladdened by the tidings of the Lord's recovery. All said, May the great Pundit live forever. The Lord of Vaikuntha observes Thakar Brindavandas, made merry in this manner. Who has power to know him if he does not make himself known? These manifestations of spiritual perturbations described by Thakar Brindavandas in the above passage are liable to be misunderstood. They were manifested by Sri Gaur Sundar under the form of the symptoms of nervous malady. Those who want to understand everything in terms of ordinary mundane experience and are not prepared to admit the existence or possibility of existence of the supermundane, naturally reject the clear testimony of the Vaishnava writers to the effect that the spiritual perturbations are not physical phenomena at all, even though they necessarily appear as such to the clouded vision and understanding of all mortals. The principle has already been discussed elsewhere. It applies to the whole range of spiritual manifestations. The name Krishna, the remains of the food tasted by Krishna, the objects used in the worship of Krishna such as buildings, utensils, etc. The body and mind of the person who worships Krishna are, every one of them, spiritual entities, the consensus of opinion of all empiricists to the contrary notwithstanding. It is a difference of view which separates those who admit the existence of the eternal and unbridgeable gulf that divides the spiritual from the material, from those who consciously or unconsciously hold that the two are identical. The latter form the large and influential body of the anti-transcendentalists and philanthropists. But the real transcendentalists possess an intelligible and consistent theistic philosophy. They believe in the actual substantive existence of the supermundane plane which never submits to the inspection of the material senses. The spiritual manifestations belong to the transcendental plane. They have to be carefully distinguished on the one hand from all worldly phenomena and on the other from dishonest or misguided exhibitions of the pseudo-transcendentalist. Everyone is free to believe or not believe a thing or a proposition. But no clear thinker would claim the right of misrepresenting or deliberately misunderstanding a proposition or an occurrence. The materialists and pseudo-transcendentalists have deliberately misunderstood and misstated the accounts of the spiritual scriptures. This is not honest blunder. It was this possibility, nay the certainty of deliberate misunderstanding on the part of all disbelievers and pseudo-believers, that led Sri Gaur Sundar to devise this method for saving them from the offense of blasphemy, of disguising the sattvika manifestations of spiritual love under the form of the symptoms of a disease with which they have the closest external similarity. The opinion of those who hold the view that the so-called sattvika manifestations are also themselves due to the diseased condition of the brain does not carry any more weight than deliberate misrepresentations. No physician can understand the real cause of the appearance or cessation of the phenomenon known as disease. But it is unfortunately only a small number of doctors who suspect and allow for this great insufficiency of the grounds of their knowledge in opining about bodily manifestations of any kind. Medical science is no less subject to the fundamental limitations of sensuous empiricism than its sister sciences. No science in the modern sense of the term would deserve a serious hearing unless it either helped the codification or widening of our stock of worldly experience. Considered from this point of view, the science of medicine has no jurisdiction over spiritual manifestations, and this ought to be more clearly recognized, acted upon, and proclaimed by the leading scientists of today than they are always accustomed to do. They are, of course, free to criticize the methods and experiences of the absolutists. It is only when they are really unable to understand spiritual matters after proper endeavor that such criticism has its real use in exposing the vagaries or opposition of insincere persons and thereby preventing mischief from that quarter. But let them not forget their legitimate function by themselves setting up as spiritualists and attempting in that unscientific manner to manufacture theories of the absolute on the basis of any worldly stuff, and thereby prove one more nuisance and obstruction in the way of the honest inquiry of the transcendental. Those who willfully offend against reason are rightly punished by the perpetuation of their ignorance, for which they have to thank only themselves. The sattvika perturbations due to love for Krishna are objects of longing to devotees of the very highest order who are absolutely free from all ignorance and all taint of self-seeking. This is necessarily unintelligible to those who have not thought it worth their while to cross the threshold of spiritual life. Their self-sufficient attitude towards the problems of the eternal duties is only a proof of their utter slavery to the illusory power of Vishnu, the goddess Maya, who is ever usefully engaged in deluding the race of the hypocrites of all shades. The utterances and activities of the servants of Vishnu are a perpetual enigma to the shrewdest atheists. No efforts of their perverted intellect can find out their real significance. The words uttered by the Vaishnava are transcendental, as are all activities. They are perfectly incomprehensible to conceited sinners who have been assigned this material world as the place of their abode as the expiatory punishment of such perversity. The deluding power of Vishnu is ever engaged in guarding the portals of the transcendental realm against the impious assaults of all builders of the Babel. The realization of this truth alone enables us to attain that perfect humility of the spirit to which the gates of the eternal realm of Vishnu are ever likely to open of themselves. The humility that is current in this world is the perverted reflection of the substantive spiritual quality, and is all the more heinous because such disguised form of self-conceit constitutes the deliberate misrepresentation of true humility. External runness or smoothness of conduct is no criterion of the real humility. The really humble conduct of the selfless devotee of Vishnu may seem as rudeness, conceit, and even arrogance to the pretended view of the deliberate hypocrite. There is no help for a person who chooses to willfully misunderstand. Such persons have been aptly compared to the owl whose eyes are denied only the sight of the glorious sun. To many impartial critics who are fully conscious of the vagaries of our present intellect and its pretended efforts to approach the absolute, and who are, therefore, prepared to reserve their judgment on a subject so alien to their whole experience, the conduct of Sri Gaur Sundar on this particular occasion may still seem to be open to the charge of apparent inconsistency. They may properly enough ask whether Sri Gaur Sundar wanted to be regarded as the devotee of Krishna or as Krishna himself. If he wished to teach the people of this world the highest and only service of the absolute person by his own practice, how could the manifestation of his real nature as recipient of worship be consistent with such purpose? This criticism overlooks the fact that there is a very close approximation to the divinity in the highest stage of devotion when the devotee is apt to be persuaded that he is Krishna himself, and in that mood sets himself to imitating the activities of Krishna. This is to be carefully distinguished from the erroneous conclusion of the professors of the cult of the undifferentiated Brahman that the fulfillment of worship, which they regard as only a probationary stage, is attained by complete merging with the object of worship, who is conceived as being absolutely devoid of form and activity of any kind. In the case of the true devotee, the worship is not a make-believe, temporary expedient as it is in the case of the other. If the service which we offer to Krishna is supposed to be due to certain changing circumstances, it at once loses the character of sincerity and truth. The Vaishnava knows himself to be the eternal servant of the Lord. He does not think it possible or desirable to merge in Krishna and thereby cease to be his servant. This is the ambition of those hypocrites who, while pretending to be the servants of a God whom they cannot or do not purposely attempt to define, really cherish in the background of their disloyal minds the design of being someday freed from the irksome necessity of such service as the reward of their insincerity. To them, therefore, the end is necessarily different from the means. By the adoption, for the time being, of a particular method which is to be discarded on the attainment of the object of such endeavor, the absolute cannot be realized. The relative can never lead, not even as a means, to the absolute. It involves the fallacy of the major premise. The major premise in this case is too narrow and the middle term is undistributed. Untruth cannot lead to the truth. By means of the truth alone the truth can be realized. As we do not possess the knowledge of the truth and have no chance of ever knowing him with the help of our present limited faculties, we are either doomed to the state of eternal ignorance or liable to be enlightened from above by grace. There is no other alternative. The Vaishnava, therefore, accepts the latter alternative for attaining to the knowledge of the truth. The abstract monist holds consistently neither to the one nor to the other. He does not believe fully either in his own ability or in revelation. He has, therefore, no locus standi and necessarily tumbles headlong into the depths of uncertainty which he calls God or Brahman in order to delude himself and his followers with the hope which, despite all perversity, his and their natures instinctively demand that they are for a time being as a sort of servants of the Absolute. When the true devotee exhibits the moods and activities of his master, he does so as a loyal servant rendered completely oblivious of his own separate existence and interests by the contemplation of his beloved. But he knows, especially at such moments more fully than ever, that he himself is not the master. The conduct of the monist in his so-called realized state, siddhi, bears no resemblance to the activities of the devotee engrossed by the thoughts of his master who, due to his consequent forgetfulness of his own self, thus enacts the master's part. But the monist ceases to function on merging with the Absolute. In the case of Sri Caitanya, he is sometimes found to be declaring himself to be Krishna. Those who want to misunderstand will say that he was guilty of inconsistency of conduct because he could have easily avoided any suspicions being aroused regarding the sincerity of his own conduct by abstaining from such explicit declarations of his possession of the master's nature. But at the same time we must remember that he was not merely simulating but actually personating the devotee. This is incomprehensible to us. But it happens to be the fact, as testified to by the author of Sri Caitanya Charitamrita in the opening verses of his work dealing with the object of the Lord's appearance in this world. The real object, says Sri Krishnadas Kavira, was to taste his own sweetness by clothing himself with the disposition and beauty of Sri Radhika. All other work could have been, and was as a matter of fact actually performed by the secondary avatars. The Lord's own special purpose in appearing in the world, which cannot be realized by any except himself, was to experience the love of Sri Radhika for himself. He, therefore, could not be recognized by those who were not his innermost devotees. It is true that he was recognized as Krishna by his followers from whom he did not hide his real nature. This was necessary for the purpose of the Leela, and the possession of such knowledge by his devotees served to enhance the charm of their service and also to regulate their conduct. Therefore, these direct manifestations possess a double face like Sri Caitanya himself. Those who choose to ignore the face of the devotee will miss the real significance of his conduct and teaching, no less than those who disregard the divine face. All so-called partial truth is a deluding empiric conception and has no place in spiritual experience. In the absolute realm there is diversity, without rupturous dividing lines. In order to be able to understand the activities of the devotees of the Absolute Person Vishnu, it is necessary to remember that enlightenment from above is the indispensable essential precondition. It is futile to attempt to know him by means of our present limited understanding. Hence the necessity of having recourse to the spiritual preceptor and spiritual initiation. Initiation, Diksha, consists in complete submission to the Absolute, which is equivalent to loyal and sincere submission to the guidance of the spiritual preceptor, such submission being identical with obedience to the word of Krishna as revealed in the Sattvada Shastras, of which the spiritual preceptor is both the only bona fide exponent and follower, the indispensable requisites for spiritual preceptorship. The act of the disciple in submitting to the preceptor is not to be confounded with the renunciation of the right of private judgment or subordinating one's own judgment to another's. Both preceptor and disciple are under obligation to obey only the spiritual scriptures. It is a matter of willing admission of superior progress on the path of the eternal, and not a question of enforced servitude. Both preceptor and disciple are free and sincere inquirers of the Absolute by the method of unconditional submission to the Absolute. Both realize the necessity and the rationale of such submission. Both know that the only real freedom consists in absolute submission to the truth. All these conditions are scrupulously observed in their mutual relationship by the bona fide preceptor and disciple. The effect of such practical submission to the Absolute is freedom from the limitations of the materialized senses. No sooner is this act of complete self-surrender to the spiritual preceptor made than the devotee is accepted by Krishna as his own. The body, senses and mind of such a person are surcharged with the spiritual essence by the grace of Krishna, and the initiated thereby becomes eligible for eternally serving the feet of Krishna by the purified body, senses and mind. The service of the Absolute is possible only on the plane of the Absolute and in the spiritual body by means of the spiritual senses. The soul of Jiva possesses body, senses and mind. Krishna has also his own divine form, senses and mind. The soul of the Jiva is constituted to serve Krishna with his spiritual body, mind and senses. The activities of the Jiva in this world, in the fallen state, is a perverted deluded caricature of his true and eternal function. The body, mind and senses of the devotee appear to conditioned souls to be similar to their adventitious material body, senses and mind. But this is not really the case. It is the effect of delusion. The sattvika perturbations which are possible only in the spiritual body appear to the materialized vision of sinful jivas as possessing the character of physical manifestations. Such conclusion is equally deluded. Those who do not admit the necessity of submission to Krishna cannot necessarily understand what the practice of such submission implies. The act of submission is the key to the spiritual realm. The denial of this is tantamount to ignorance. The refusal to submit to the truth is the logical equivalent of the slavery of untruth by means of the deluding physical senses. The atheists are the only ignorant and unfree persons by their refusal to follow the guidance of their reason. Sri Gaur Sundar talked much while he was exhibiting the Leela of direct manifestation under the guise of nervous distemper. This confirmed the suspicions of those who were looking out for the symptoms of disease. The words uttered by the devotee are transcendental sounds that have the power of producing spiritual enlightenment by freeing from worldliness if the unprejudiced ear is turned to them. The transcendental Lord is served as the transcendental sounds. Those who admit the spiritual nature of the devotees of Krishna know that they are constantly engaged in the service of Krishna on the plane of the Absolute. The utterance of too much earthly sound is no doubt a sign of aggravated worldliness and is the malady of madness to which we are sometimes subjected by the mercy of Krishna so that we may be reminded thereby of the insubstantial and transitory nature of our most highly valued worldly possessions. One suffering from the aggravated disease of worldliness is not healed by the application of medicines which are supplied by physical nature for the restoration of the worldly delusion. Such malady, treatment and cure all belong to the realm of delusions. They only serve to keep up the deluded idea of the wholesome nature of this world and its concerns for the correctness of atheists by such bitter experience. The delusion of those who put their trust in the delusion of the earthly physicians, who have a very high opinion of themselves, their science and its utility, is augmented by the practice of such trust. The maladies of both worldly patients and worldly doctors can be healed only if they learn to distinguish between the symptoms of real disease, the punishment of sin, and the similar spiritual manifestations of devotees who are absolutely free from all taint of worldliness, which are the only cure of all diseases. But the ill-fated have not the leisure, so wholly engrossed they choose to be in their worldly concerns and self-gratulations, to exercise their unprejudiced reason on the subject of their disease of the worldly sojourn. They are so absolutely persuaded of their own rectitude that they employ their wits in disproving the claims, to any real goodness, of those very persons who endeavor to cure them of their worldly disease by affording them the opportunity of listening to those redeeming sounds that bring the tidings of the Absolute to all benighted souls. They mistake, as the symptoms of an unsound mind with which unfortunately they are only too familiar, words and utterances that are the only medicine of their diseased souls. This infatuity is the corrective punishment of their unwarrantable self-complacency. Krishna's deluding power is ever seeking the holes in the coats of every one of us in order to disturb us in the most sensitive parts and thereby to cure us of the disease of such fatuous reliance on the resources of our deluded, limited understanding. He, therefore, sends his own beloved ones, in the guise of patients, to the doctors of this world for delivering such of them as keep their ears open to the voice of Krishna spoken through the mouths of his devotees. But the other sort sees not, and misses their only opportunity, as further corrective punishment for their gross, deliberate worldliness. This is the fate of those worldly wise people who consider the unrestrained talk of Sri Gaur Sundar as a conclusive proof of his madness. Of course it is possible, not inevitable for a time even after initiation, for a person to exhibit the state of suffering from the actual effects of sensuous activities that he had indulged in before his initiation. This does not come amiss to the bona fide probationer who never wants to get rid of his merited sufferings in lieu of his intention to serve. Such suffering causes the genuine probationer no pain but, on the contrary, is to him a source of unalloyed spiritual bliss as providing greater opportunities of service. To the uninitiated, the sight of apparent suffering of the devotee presents a double face, viz., of those patient sufferings and merited punishment, both of which are untrue and are a trick of the deluding power to prevent the obstinate impious from serving the devotee as devotee. The doctor who may be called by the devotee to treat him is afforded the opportunity of rendering unconscious service to the Vaishnava and will obtain his reward in the shape of a lessening of his worldliness if he is careful not to allow his mind to cherish any prejudice against the bona fide of the real devotee merely from the fact that he might have been guilty of worldly conduct in his past life. This total absence of all irrational prejudice is possible only in a person who is sincerely conscious of his own imperfections. A doctor who treats a real sadhu without prejudice thereby unconsciously serves Krishna himself and obtains as his reward freedom from all ignorance by the mercy of the sadhu who is pleased to manifest to him his real spiritual nature by the will of Krishna. As soon as one obtains the real sight of the Vaishnava, he instantly awakes from the deep waking slumber of ignorance to which he was being lulled by the deluding tricks of Maya. No amount of any so-called unprejudiced service rendered to a non-Vaishnava can lead to such a result. On the contrary, if a non-Vaishnava is too zealously served, his so-called benefactor is liable to be punished by an increase of his delusion, as he would thereby only develop the vanity of false humanity which makes him overlook the distinction between the Vaishnava and the non-Vaishnava as recipients of our service. Such a person can hardly be expected to be ever able, unless after he is really cured of his fondness for non-Vaishnavas, to grasp the real significance of the eternal distinction between the spiritual and the material, or to realize the truth that his soul has no affinity whatever with the objects and aspirations of this world. The apparent defect of a bona fide Vaishnava have been aptly compared to the mud and froth that are sometimes found in the holy water of the Ganges. These in no way affect the eternal and unchangeable purity of the sacred stream that issues from the holy feet of the Supreme Lord. On the contrary, even such mud and froth themselves imbibe, by contact with the chastening water of the Ganges, the quality of delivering all really unclean persons from the sticking dirt of worldliness. It requires a really impartial and supremely patient judgment to be able to enter into this spirit of the philosophy of theism. Sri Gaur Sundar's teachings are a sealed book to the crooked and captious, but are easily understood by the really candid. Worldly merit or demerit is of no help in this matter. Sincerity of the soul is the one thing needful. Insincerity is the concomitant of worldliness, which is the cause of all our self-made ignorance and misery. But some may still raise the objection that Sri Gaur Sundar could have done even greater good and obtained a better hearing for his teachings if he had exhibited no such symptoms even of apparent madness. Of course, the Supreme Lord is free to do whatever he likes and there can be no defect in what he wills or does. Gaur Sundar was, in this instance, exhibiting the Leela of the ideal devotee. The necessity for such performance lay in the fact that the deliverance of all fettered souls is absolutely dependent on the realization of the transcendental nature of the devotee of God. Such realization can alone enlighten him regarding the spiritual nature of his own proper self. The object of Sri Gaur Sundar was to remove all misconceptions that stand in the way of such realization. One of the commonest fallacies of this wide world is that religion is only one specific department of human activities out of many. Or, in other words, that it is possible to serve both God and Mammon at the same time, or at any rate in recurring succession. This idea, it would not be an exaggeration to observe, has been allowed by culpable negligence on the part of writers to pervade all literature of modern times. Religion is pedantically differentiated from politics, from morality, from aesthetics and from worldly activities of all sorts, not so much for the purpose of emphasizing the eternal distinction between the spiritual and the material, but with the sinister motive of restricting the scope of religious activity itself within defined worldly bounds. If this fallacy, which is so widely disseminated, once finds a real lodgment in the brain, one can never realize the nature of the spiritual service of God, nor understand that it is possible to practice the same even while we are placed in this world without doing harm to anybody. I may notice in passing that the practice of so-called religious toleration, which is so much affected by a particular stamp of thinkers, is also based upon the above fallacy, viz., that it is possible without any real danger to anyone to keep religion out of the other affairs of life. One who prays regularly to God in the evening and morning and thinks that thereby his obligations to Godhead are at least partially fulfilled, utterly misunderstands the nature of his duty as the exclusive servant of the Lord. The obligation to serve Krishna is a self-imposed principle which knows no limits. Krishna can and ought to be served in all circumstances by each and every person of this world. One who really serves him does so in his every act and thought. The devotee serves Krishna at all times, both when he wakes and when he seems to sleep. Every act of the devotee under every circumstance is an act of service. One who fails to understand this fundamental principle of spiritual existence cannot recognize the devotee of God and is doomed to sin and worldliness for this reason, notwithstanding all his exertions resembling the external conduct of the real sadhus. The devotee of Krishna serves him under all circumstances and he does nothing else. He neither eats nor sleeps but only serves. When he exhibits the activity of apparent eating and sleeping, he does so for our benefit in order to show us however we, for whom eating and sleeping are necessary, can get rid of this false existence with its whole round of so-called interminable duties and obligations, if we only obey the word of God manifested in the holy scriptures and explained by the discourse and practice of the eternal servants of Krishna who, by his command, make themselves visible to our mortal senses and who live and move in our midst for the fulfillment of the beneficial purpose of the Supreme Lord in regard to ourselves. Such is the real nature of the true servants of Krishna. The Vaishnava tells us that the soul of every entity has the capacity of serving Krishna however circumstanced he may appear to be. The souls of the stone, the tree, the baby in the womb, the lunatic, the dying and the dead are all equally eligible in this matter. Because no circumstance of this deluding world, however formidable or adverse it may seem to be to our eclipsed cognition, can offer any real obstruction to the spiritual service of the Lord. It is the truth of this proposition that the devotees are engaged in establishing for the benefit of the unbelievers of this world, by all their teaching and practice. It would be a great blunder, therefore, to suppose that any evil can befall the servants of Krishna, here or elsewhere. The devotee is put by Krishna in all possible situations in order to train up the judgment of those who profess to believe in them. It is only when a person's budding faith survives this purgatorial ordeal that he is in a position to understand the teaching of the Vaishnava, which is identical with his conduct. Conversely, the hypocrites are prevented from committing the offense of the pretense of serving the devotee by such constant searching of their weakest points. These exhibitions serve the doubly beneficial purpose of enhancing the faith of all sincere seekers of the truth and keeping at a distance all those who have no inclination to serve Krishna but only themselves. In this world we cannot really serve Krishna. We can only serve those servants of the Lord who are mercifully sent by him into our midst to deliver us from the state of sin and ignorance. Krishna cannot be served by the sinful and the ignorant. Those who think that it is possible to serve Krishna with the resources of our limited understandings or by the physical bodies confound the transcendental service of Krishna which passes the understanding of man with the corresponding atheistical performances. To complete this delusion, they are also firmly persuaded by reason of their cultivated aversion to Krishna that whatever any individual sinner may choose to fancy as the truth contains an element of truth. What they really want is that truth must serve them and not they the truth. They want to be the masters and not the servants of Krishna. But these irrational, hypocritical, self-seeking, misguided atheists are prevented, by their perversity due to such senseless prostitution of their freedom of will, from having the sight of Krishna or his devotees. Those who fail to realize the fatal nature of the offense committed against the Vaishnavas are unfit to serve the devotees of Krishna, although by such service alone conditioned souls can be delivered from the consequences of their willful transgressions. It is an offense against the Vaishnavas to suppose that a bona fide Vaishnava does anything else than the service of Krishna, which is absolutely free from the least taint of worldliness. It is also an offense against the Vaishnavas to serve or associate with a non-Vaishnava, or to suppose that a sinner while in the state of sin is a Vaishnava. Until we are freed from these impious errors, we cannot be said to desire the mercy of the true devotees of the Lord. The transcendental activities and teachings of Sri Gaur Sundar as expounded and practiced by his associates and the followers of his associates can alone save us from these errors to which an age given to superficial controversies, like the present, has an abnormal besetting tendency to subscribe. The real significance of these pastimes of the Lord, although they happen to be perfectly explicit, were not apparently permitted to be understood even by the devotees in order to impress upon worldlings the truth that no one is able to know him until and unless he enables one to know. The tidings of the recovery of Sri Gaurasundar filled everyone with joy. The Vaishnavas specially availed of this opportunity of impressing upon him the necessity of serving the feet of Sri Krishna by arguing the reason that there is no certainty of life or sanity. Sri Caitanya was naturally partial to the Vaishnavas. Their exhortations made him smile as he stopped to do obeisance to them all on his way in the company of his innumerable pupils. Sri Caitanya then resumed his duties as teacher. He taught his pupils inside the Chanda Mandap of the house of Mukunda Sanya. While the Lord was thus engaged in expounding the texts to his pupils, perfumed medicated oil was applied to his head by some exceptionally fortunate persons of many good deeds. Sri Caitanya took his seat in the middle of the room and was surrounded by his pupils who sat in a circle round their teacher. That gathering is without a parallel in the annals of the world. Sri Brindavandas Thakur ransacked the scriptures for a parallel instance for the purpose of comparison. At Bidari Kasrama, Sri Narayana teaches Sanaka and other rishis sitting round him in a circle. The act of Sri Gaurasundara resembled this Leela of Sri Narayana himself. The comparison holds good for the reason that the darling of Sachi is the same as Sri Narayana who dwells at Bidari Kasrama. It was, therefore, the very same pastime of Bidari Kasrama that Sri Caitanya was thus enacting in the company of his disciples at Nabadwip. At the conclusion of his teaching by midday, Sri Gaurasundara would go out with his pupils to the Ganges for his bath. After sporting for a time in the holy water of the Ganges, he returned home and worshipped Vishnu. Offering water and circumambulating Sri Tulasi, he sat to his meal by uttering repeatedly the name of Hari. Sri Lakshmi Devi served the food and the Lord of Vaikuntha ate the same. The pious mother was privileged to have the full view of this sight. After meal he used to chew betel and then retired for rest. Sri Lakshmi Devi tended his feet as the Lord laid himself down in his bed. The Lord then bent his auspicious glance on the goddess who serves in the office of sleep of the Supreme Lord. Having rested for a while, Sri Gaurasundara used to go out of the house a second time with his books. Chapters E. In the streets of Nabadwip, Sri Gaurasundara as professor chose the afternoons for visiting the citizens of Nabadwip in the company of his pupils. He graciously accosted all the people, and everyone entertained feelings of the deepest regard for the Lord. This respectful attitude towards him, which was universal, was a matter of instinct, as at this period no one was aware of the divinity of the Lord. The Lord frequented all the streets of the city, affording the people an opportunity of beholding him who is inaccessible even to the gods. The Lord now behaved with the same absence of reserve on these visits to the citizens as we noticed on the occasion of his nervous malady. In this case also no one was able to recognize him, although he stood fully manifest to all seeming. Thakur Brindavandas has handed down the following particulars of these activities. On one of these occasions Sri Gaurasundara presented himself at the door of a weaver's home. The weaver at once made obeisance to him with the greatest respect. The Lord asked him to bring out his best cloth, which the weaver did at once. The Lord asked what price he expected for his cloth. The weaver replied that he would accept whatever was offered. After the bargain had been settled, the Lord said he had no money with him. The weaver replied that it was not necessary for him to pay immediately. He might take the cloth, wear it and pay in 10 days or a fortnight or by installments, according to his convenience. The Lord bestowed his auspicious glance on that weaver as he left the place. The Lord then entered the quarter of the town which was occupied by the milkman. He took his seat at the doorway of the home of one of the cowherds. The Lord, by the privilege of a Brahmana, commanded him jocosely in an imperious tone to bring out his milk and curds, saying that he would favor him that day by accepting the best of the gifts that his household could provide. The cowherds beheld it was the god of love himself who thus asked for their gift. With great respect they offered their best seat to him. The Lord continued to talk in a jocose vein to the cowherds. They addressed him as their maternal uncle. Some asked him to eat their cooked food in their company. A certain milkman took him to his home on his shoulders. A few remarked that he had once eaten all the cooked food that was in their houses and he might probably recollect it. Saraswati, the goddess of speech, spoke truly, but the milkmen themselves did not know. The Lord laughed at these words of the cowherds. All the milkmen now brought out their milk, ghee, curds, sar and excellent butter and gladly gave to the Lord. The Lord expressed his satisfaction at such friendly conduct of the cowherds. He then went forward and entered the home of a dealer in perfumes, Gandhavanika. The trader made his bow at the feet of the Lord with great respect. The Lord asked him to bring out his best perfumes. As he did so, the Lord inquired their price. The trader replied that the price must be already known to him and that it would be hardly proper to demand any price from him. That trader then begged to be allowed to apply the perfumes to his body and to return home for that day. If enough of fragrance persisted till next day and did not cease after bath, then he might pay any price that he liked. With these words the trader, with his own hand, put his perfumes all over the holy form of the Lord in a rapture of joy that was perfectly unaccountable. The Supreme Lord, observes Thakur Brindavandas, abiding in the heart of all beings, ever attracts their minds unto himself, who is not bewitched by the sight of his beauty. The Lord next made his way to the home of a garland maker. The garland maker was smitten with the extraordinary beauty of the Lord and did obeisance to him after offering a seat with great respect. The Lord asked him to give good garlands and told him that he had no money with him. The garland maker, noticing that he had the appearance of one who had actually realized God, had said that he might not pay. With these words the garland maker placed his garlands on the divine form of the Lord. This made Sri Gaur Sundar and all his pupils laugh. The Lord, bestowing his auspicious glance on that garland maker, made his way to the home of a betel seller. The betel seller was taken by surprise on seeing the Lord himself crossing the threshold of his humble abode. In his delight the betel seller, of his own accord, offered him his betels, which made the Lord laugh. The Lord asked why he was offering the betel made up with betel nut without demanding any price. The betel seller made reply that it was due to a spontaneous impulse of his mind. The Lord began to chew the prepared betel that had been offered. The betel seller then presented the Lord with betel leaf, camphor and other spices of excellent quality used in making up the betel, desiring him with great reverence to accept it and would not take any price. Sri Gaur Sundar favored that betel seller in this fashion. The Lord visited the residence of a dealer in conchs who made him obeisance with great reverence on beholding him. The Lord asked for good conchs, declaring that as he had no money with him he did not know how he could buy them. The conch dealer at once gave the Lord his best conchs with the remark that he might pay at his leisure and consider himself under no obligation to pay. The Lord was very much pleased by hearing these words of the conch dealer and bestowed on him the favor of his auspicious glance. In this manner the Lord visited regularly the houses of all the townspeople of Nabadwap. The Lord next made his way to the house of a diviner who could predict everything. The Lord told him that as he was reputed to be a very competent person, he had come to him to inquire about information regarding himself as to what he was in his former births. Right, said the diviner. But on applying himself as a preliminary to repeating mentally the mantram of Gopala, that diviner of excellent deeds at once beheld the divine form with the bluish hue, four-armed, holding the conch, disc, club and lotus, his breast adorned with the jewel Kaustubha and the sign of Srivatsa. He saw the Lord in the prison chamber at the dead of night with his parents in front of him in the act of adoration. Presently he had a vision that the father, taking up his newborn boy in his arms, put him away that very night in the cowherd settlement. He saw again the nude, beautiful, two-armed child, with the belt of jingling bells on his waist, tasting the butter with both hands. The diviner in fact saw all those signs that belonged to his own cherished divinity on whom he mediated at all time. He beheld once again the divine form, with the flute touching his lips, in the triple bent attitude, surrounded by the milkmaids, discoursing instrumental and vocal music. On beholding this extraordinary vision the diviner opened his eyes in wonder and fixing his gaze on Gauranga went on repeating his recitals. He then supplicated the deity of his cherished worship in these words, "Listen, O Gopala, divine boy, do thou show me quickly who this Brahmana was in his former births." Thereupon, the diviner had a vision of the Lord, bow in hand, of grass-green hue, seated in the attitude of the warrior. He saw him again in the midst of the cataclysm of complete destruction in the form of the wonderful boar whose tusk was holding aloft this world. He saw him once more appearing as the man-lion, of most fierce aspect, infinitely tender to his devotee. He saw him again in the act of deluding the sacrificing King Bali, in the form of the dwarf. Then he beheld him in the form of the fish in the waters of the deluge, playing merrily in the flood. That diviner of excellent deeds saw the Lord once again in the form of the maddened holder of the plough, with the club in his hand. The diviner saw the shining form of Jagannath with Subhadra in the middle and Balarama on his right. The diviner had a vision in his manner of the true nature of the Lord, but yet he understood nothing. Such, says Thakur Brindavandas, is the force of the deluding power of the Lord. The diviner was very much astonished and thought within himself that the Brahmana must be a great sorcerer, or he might be some god who had perchance appeared to him in a frolic in the guise of a Brahmana in order to delude him. He also duly noticed the indications of the superhuman fiery glow irradiating the body of the Brahmana and was perplexed, thinking that he was being befooled for pretending to know everything. While the diviner was busy with these thoughts, the Lord said, laughing, "Who am I? What do you see? Tell me everything without reserve." The diviner said, "Be pleased to leave me alone for the present. Let me repeat my mantram with a clear mind. I shall tell you in the afternoon." "Very good," said the Lord as he went off on his way laughing. The Lord now presented himself at the home of his beloved Sridhar. The Lord often visited Sridhar at his house on various excuses and never left him without exchanging jokes with him for a short time. On seeing the Lord, Sridhar at once approached him with great respect and made him take a seat. Sridhar was naturally of a most gentle disposition. The Lord's behavior was that of a most restless and arrogant person. Thereupon the following dialogue ensued between Shri Gaurasundar and Sridhar. The Lord asked, "Sridhar, you take the name of Hari constantly. Why do you yet suffer such great privations? Tell me how it is that you suffer from want of food and clothing by serving the Lord of the Goddess of Wealth." Sridhar replied, "But I do not actually starve, and I also put on clothing of some sort, be it long or short." The Lord went on, "I notice your cloth is patched at a dozen places and there is no straw to the thatch of your hut. Is there the person in the town who is stinted for food and clothing by worshipping Chandi and Bishahari?" Sridhar said, "Bipra, thou hast said well. But yet the time of all persons passes all the same. The king lives in a palace of gems and eats and dresses most sumptuously. The birds inhabit the tree top. Nevertheless the time of both passes away all the same. They enjoy the fruits of their respectively acts awarded by the will of Isvara." The Lord said, "You have immense wealth. You dine on it most sumptuously in secret. When will that day be when I shall make your secret known to everybody? Then shall I see how you can deceive the people so." Said Sridhar, "Pundit, it is better for you to return home. It is not meet for us to quarrel with each other." The Lord said, "I am not going to let you off in this fashion. Tell me at once what you are going to give me." Sridhar replied, "I live by selling the bark of the plant and tree. You better say what at all I can give your reverence." The Lord said, "I am not just now going to take the buried treasures that you possess. I shall have it later. For the present give me gratis plantain, radishes and the soft core of the plantain tree. I shall not trouble you if you do so." Sridhar thought within himself, "The Brahmana is so very arrogant. He is certainly going to thrash me one of these days. And even if he hurts me, what can I do to a Brahmana? Neither can I afford to give him daily without being paid. Still, what a Brahmana takes even by force or guile is surely my good fortune, and I shall, therefore, give him every day." After meditating in this manner, Sridhar said, "Listen, your reverence, you need not pay anything. I shall willingly give you core, plantain, radishes and bark. So be pleased not to quarrel with me any more." The Lord said, "This is well and good. There will be no more quarrel from now if only you always give me good core, plantain and radishes." The Lord dined every day off the plantain bark of Sridhar. The core, plantain and radishes of Sridhar were the most relished dishes at his daily meal. The Lord ate the gourd that grew on the plant trained on Sridhar's thatch, cooked in milk and pepper. The Lord now asked, "Sridhar, what do you think I am? I shall go home as soon as you tell me only this." Sridhar said, "You are a Brahmana, a part and parcel of Vishnu himself." The Lord replied, "You do not know. I come of a family of milkmen. But you see me as the son of a Brahmana. I, however, know myself to be a milkman." Sridhar laughed on hearing the words of the Lord and did not recognize his own cherished deity by the force of his deluding power. Said the Lord, "Sridhar, I will tell you the truth. All the greatness of your Ganges is due to myself." Sridhar protested, "Well, my Pundit, art thou not afraid even of the Ganges? Man grows sober with advancing years. But your restlessness is increasing with double speed." After indulging in such merry repertoire with Sridhar, Lord Gauranga Hari returned to his own home. The above episodes may seem to represent the Lord in the character of a begging Brahmana who is out among the hard-worked artisans and poor people to squeeze from them the best that their poverty can yield. There are two subjects in this picture, viz., the conduct of the Lord and of the humble folk, both of which deserve our careful consideration. Shri Gaurasundar did not accept the gifts of the poor for any charitable purpose but frankly for his own personal use. He does not appear to have rendered them any service in return. Those people did not expect nor wish for any return. Neither did they apparently give their things with the idea that they were giving them to a needy beggar. They gave from a feeling of reverence and not on account of his individual qualities, of which they had not always a very decidedly all-round favorable opinion. Even Sridhar admitted to himself that the Brahmana was unduly arrogant. The soothsayer, who to many persons would seem to have been the most favored of all, took him to be a person versed in the black art who was trying to befool him, so all these people gave away their best things to this arrogant Brahmana in conformity with the customary practice and not for the reason that Sri Gaur Sundar possessed any outstanding merit or worth of his own. Sridhar even complains that the Brahmana was not above using both force as well as dissimulation to obtain the lion's share of his scanty wares. Sri Gaur Sundar may thus appear to be evidently exploiting the credulity of ordinary superstitious, ignorant masses for his own personal profit and thereby countenancing the objectionable practices of those degenerate brahmanas who go about begging for their livelihood. Why did those poor people give him their best things? Let Sridhar speak for the rest. Sridhar said he did not covet the wealth of kings. He thought that the time of himself was passing in exactly the same way as that of kings, and he did not hold Godhead responsible for making any inequitable difference between a king and himself, as in his opinion there was really no difference. But neither was Sridhar a cynic. He was aware that the things of this world were capable of being rightly used in the service of Vishnu, and that no depth of poverty was an excuse for the neglect of this paramount duty. Giving to the Brahmana was, in his opinion, identical with giving to Vishnu, because Vishnu was represented in this world by the Brahmana for accepting such service through his devotees. True, the Brahmana in question, viz. Sri Gaur Sundar, appeared to him to be very arrogant and dissembling. But he himself was also not prepared to give willingly anything to the Brahmana on the worthless plea of his utter poverty. And, therefore, the only alternative was to suffer his things to be taken by force or fraud by the Brahmana who did him the favor of accepting his things in this boisterous fashion. This is the inside of the heart of Sridhar. This was the faith of all those humble people. But can we really serve Godhead by offering him the things of this world? Sri Gaur Sundar says we can. If we regard Godhead and the objects offered to Godhead as categories of this world, the process is objectionable, involving the degradation of worship. Godhead is not a receiver of any earthly objects, but we have also nothing to offer him except these very earthly objects, because we ourselves are of this earth at present. Sri Gaur Sundar says that we are not earthly, but if we attain our natural, supermundane state, we are in a position to realize that the objects of this earth have also a spiritual relationship to ourselves. This spiritual side of the things of this world does not manifest itself to us as long as we continue to regard them as being meant for gratifying our hankering for worldly enjoyment. Such attitude is the sign as well as cause of our real ignorance of our true self. There is such a thing as the soul, apart from limited and temporary entities of all gross and subtle types. This soul is our proper self. The vision of our souls is for the present clouded by the exclusive contemplation of alien objects which we are apt to consider as having affinity with ourselves. The soul in the sinful state values only such use of things as can afford him pleasure in some form or other. He constantly strives to multiply the opportunity and scope of such enjoyment. This vision is, however, the clouded vision. It was not Sridhar's vision. Sridhar realized that the enjoyment of the things of this world could not really satisfy his soul. The things of this world are meant not to be enjoyed but to be used in some other way. They are to be offered unconditionally to one for whose sole enjoyment they are meant. And who is that one person? He cannot be any sinful creature. He is no mortal, but Godhead himself. The Brahmana is part and parcel of Vishnu. Vishnu also appears in this gross world for enjoying the things of this world. Sridhar believed that he does so for the benefit of sinners, that Vishnu appears in the form of Brahmanas who are free from all sin. A Brahmana knows the proper use of the things of this world. He does not seek his own enjoyment but serves Godhead therewith. It is because he possesses this knowledge that he is a Brahmana. If anything is given willingly or unwillingly to a Brahmana, it is offered to Godhead and is sure to reach him through the Brahmana. The things of this world in this relationship to Sri Gaur Sundar also appeared to Sridhar in this light. This was so because Sridhar's soul was in his natural state, who could realize that he has no affinity with the things of this world as a means of his worldly enjoyment. Sridhar's philosophy might seem to make no provision for the material prosperity of the world. It may also seem to be akin to blind faith. The last objection has been answered in the preceding paragraph. The so-called clear-sightedness of the conditioned souls is their real blindness. Our faith in the value of the things of this world as objects of our enjoyment is the real blind faith. Sridhar's faith is not blinded by this essentially irrational partiality in favor of worldliness, the utter worthlessness of which must be patent to all as a fact of even one's daily and hourly experience. Sridhar's philosophy does not, indeed, trouble about the progress of this world, which it attributes to the direct action of Godhead awarding the material fruits of the sinful endeavors of conditioned souls who alone happen to be the denizens of this mundane world. He regards so-called worldly prosperity more as a snare than a help. But he is careful not to ignore, for this reason, the very existence of this world. The world is not an illusion. So long as we are placed in this world, we cannot but have to do with things mundane. Our duty, while we are so placed, must however, be to use all kinds of material facility for the service of Vishnu, who has no wants of his own but who condescends to receive our offerings in order to enable us to live also under these adverse circumstances a life of service. The service of Vishnu is the only true and eternal religion. Its truth can be recognized by our clouded understanding during those lucid intervals when we are impelled by the experience of worldliness to be impartial seekers of a really wholesome function. There are sinless people who are not subject to the domination of the enjoyable side of phenomena, to whom all things of this world disclose their spiritual forms, who teach us to serve Vishnu with their help. The condition that is ensured by such service is the only true progress, and one that, instead of augmenting our blindness, serves to clear up our blinded vision. But we may still be disposed to ask certain questions. Will the offering of our best things to unworthy and beggarly brahmanas, who claim them as a matter of right for the purpose of gratifying their worldly appetites, also conduce to such a result? It is not necessary to discriminate between a real brahmana and a real non-brahmana. And who, indeed, is a real brahmana? Did Sridhar or the other poor people really know that Sri Gaur Sundar was Vishnu himself? Evidently they did not bother. Is such blind devotion to caste brahmanas recommended as a reliable and wholesome principle by the above episodes? Neither did Sridhar nor any of the other townsmen, who were so liberal to Sri Gaur Sundar, entertain any suspicions regarding the worth of Sri Gaur Sundar as recipient of their gifts. They did not venture to gauge the worth of a brahmana by the measure of their clouded understanding. In this view, their conduct was not the denial but the perfection of the truly rational attitude. They waited to be enlightened without muddling. This excellence of judgment was the natural concomitant of their own unworldly life, which is an indispensable preparatory for the spiritual. They will thereby soon learn about the real truth and be saved from the degrading effects of indiscriminate worldly charity to beggars for a worldly purpose. It is the only duty of all true brahmanas to enlighten everyone who really wants to be enlightened. Unworldly conduct in every relationship of life is the only proof of the possession of such desire. This mode of imparting enlightenment is the eternal dispensation of providence, and it never fails to operate with unerring beneficence in all cases. Those who are charitable to brahmanas from any worldly motive never have the sight of a real brahmana who possesses the knowledge of Godhead. But it may be argued that Sri Gaur Sundar was encouraging the trade of a betel maker by accepting his service. Is not the trade of a betel seller altogether harmful? Will such encouragement not be misunderstood as approval of a practice which is condemned by the Srimad Bhagavatam? Srimad Bhagavatam warns us against sensuous enjoyment of the objects of this world and proceeds to enumerate categorically certain forms of sensuous enjoyment that are to be avoided by all means. It says no doubt that no rules are applicable to those who really serve Krishna. Srimad Bhagavatam does not mean that the bona fide servants of Krishna are privileged to indulge in sensuous conduct. What it means is that Krishna is served by the senses of those who are perfectly unmindful of their own enjoyment. We are not required to give up anything, we are required to learn the only proper method of using everything. Till we understand this true method, we should agree to be taught, by desisting from the wrong method which would otherwise prevent us from knowing truly by the only effective method, viz., that of actual personal experience. Sri Gaur Sundar did not declare a crusade against the externality of conduct of any kind. All activities are a part and parcel of the eternal scheme of the universe and can and need never be abolished. Sri Gaur Sundar desired that we should acquire the right vision which enables us to employ all things of this world in the service of Krishna without interfering with the external appearance, which is the eternal perverted concomitant reflection of the real, shutting from us the true view of the reality. But the perverted reflection can no more be abolished than the reality. Both exist forever in their respective reciprocal relationship. It is not they but our attitude to them that requires to be adjusted. Sundar declares that the smarta view, i.e., the ordinary view of so-called orthodox Hindus, which regards a thing of this world as pure or impure by its worldly reference, is opposed to the teaching of the spiritual scriptures. Nothing can be impure except the attitude of the observer. To the pure vision everything is necessarily pure. According to the Bhagavatam, the Paramahansas are above all those rules that are meant for the guidance of conditioned souls. This leniency to them means neither undue partiality nor indiscriminate license. The scriptures provide for the strictest guidance of all dissociable souls by the eternally free sadhus who alone can understand the real spirit of those regulations and can, therefore, apply them in the proper way. This is so because they themselves always spontaneously follow the spirit that is negatively represented by those regulations. The real devotees are privileged to know that for no one there is any such thing as impurity in the sphere of spiritual service. Those who, being themselves averse to Godhead, set up as teachers of the Bhagavatam, delude themselves as well as their pupils by their false teachings. The eternally free state is not a figment of the atheist's imagination. It is, on the contrary, the most decisive proof of one's utter ignorance of the state of the devotee to suppose that the true nature of such state can be realized by the imagination of one who does not serve God. It is tantamount to confounding the shadow with the substance, darkness with light. Because such knowledge is real ignorance and such imaginary purity is the most insidious form of aversion to Godhead. Such deluded people bring upon themselves the richly deserved punishment that is due to their hopeless pursuit of the shadow under the willfully mistaken plea that it is the substance. The identification of the unreal with the real, of the wrong idea with the object, is the consciously perpetrated great error of all empiric speculations regarding the reality. It is equivalent to conscious or unconscious denial of all reality on the dishonest plea that the reality is incomprehensible to our present limited understanding. On this misapplied plea are we justified in deliberately choosing to be content with an imaginary moral order and call it also real, on the testimony of a gratuitously assumed universal instinct of the race. In other words, are we to recognize the failure of our pervert reason to know the reality by stifling the faculty of reason itself? Sri Gaur Sundar warns us against such useless act of suicide and declares that the reality really exists and can also be really known to us despite the self-created insufficiency of our present understanding, and that it is, therefore, our first and only duty to try to realize the truth by adopting a life which is really free from all taint of duplicity. That this is also the only truly rational course and one whose success is a foregone conclusion. On his return home after accosting Sridhar in the manner described above, Sri Gaur Sundar seated himself at the door of the room that was consecrated to the worship of Vishnu. The students, who had been in attendance, departed to their respective homes. As he caught sight of the rising full moon, the Lord's heart was filled with loving recollections of the moon of Brindavana. He thereupon began to discourse strains of the flute, whose sweetness was never experienced in this world. But no one could catch it except the mother. On hearing the note of the flute that bewitches the triple universe, the mother fainted on the spot by complete immersion in the ocean of bliss. Presently recovering her external consciousness, having compassed her mind, she listened to the unprecedented melody of the divine flute. She perceived the sound to proceed from the direction where Gauranga Sundar was seated. Having this wonderful oral experience, the mother came out of the room and found her son still sitting at Vishnu's doorstep. She could no longer hear the strains of the flute but beheld the disk of the moon in the bosom of her son. She saw distinctly the sphere of the moon inside the breast of her son and looked about her in amazement. Returning to her room, the mother began to think about the reason, but could not arrive at any solution. Such was the high fortune of Mother Sachi, who constantly beheld such never-ending divine manifestations. One day during the night, Mother Sachi heard hundreds of people singing and playing on musical instruments. She heard various musical sounds made by the mouth, the sound as of a dance, the tread of feet as if a vast rasa pastime was in progress. One day she found that all the house, the rooms, doors and windows, were made exclusively of light. Another day she had a sight of celestial nymphs, beautiful as Lakshmi herself, their hands adorned with the shining lotus flower. One day she had a vision of shining gods and, after just catching sight of them, could not see them again. All these visions are nothing at all impossible in the case of the mother whom the Veda declares to be the very form of devotion to Vishnu. Even those on whom the mother casts her auspicious glance but once are thereby endowed with the eligibility of beholding those manifestations. Thus did Sri Gaur Sundar, wearer of the garland of wild flowers, abide in his own eternal joy, in concealment. such being his pleasure. Although the Lord was manifesting himself in all these various ways, yet he could not be recognized even by any of his own servants. The mothers of Sri Krishna serve the Lord as embodiments of the principle of pure reverential devotion like that of Devaki and Krsna, or by unmixed maternal affection like Yasoda and Sachi. The mothers are not denied the transcendental unalloyed service of Krishna, although they are his superiors by relationship and are regarded as such by Krishna. It is the special privilege of the servants of Krishna to behold the manifestations of his divine power and majesty. Sri Sachi Devi serves the Lord with greater devotion than his other servants. She loves Sri Gaur Sundar as her son, standing in constant need of her protecting affection. This is different from the purely reverential attitude of service. In this world, parental affection precludes all element of the principle of service as practiced by an inferior. Even when the mother nurses her own child, she cannot be supposed, without a jarring violation of all sense of propriety and truth, to be guided by a feeling of reverence for her own offspring. The two sentiments, as they are conceived in this world, are different and incompatible. In the mothers of Krishna, maternal affection perfects and incorporates, instead of excluding, the element of loyal servitude. There is no loss of any principle but only the growing excellence, by additional elements, of the one indivisible basic function which, inconceivably to us, gathers up all minute and nice distinctions that are found pervertedly reflected in the exclusive grades of mundane relationships. The most noticeable feature of the activities of Sri Gaur Sundar at this period is arrogance. He chose to carry the pastime of his arrogance to such lengths that there was at that time in the whole of Nabadwip no person who could beat him in this respect. Commenting on this, Thakur Brindavandas is led to observe that it is the peculiar and inalienable characteristic of Krishna that he has no equal in whatever role he chooses to play, and Sri Brindavandas Thakur proceeds to recapitulate the most notable instances of his excesses. When the Lord chooses to indulge in the pastime of fighting, he excels all in the most perfect use of the weapons of warfare. When he wishes to indulge in amorous sports, he effects the conquest of myriads of his sweethearts. When he desires to enjoy the pleasures of riches, the homes of his servants are filled with the most profuse abundance of all precious jewels. When, at a subsequent period, this very arrogant Gaur Sundar renounced the world and turned a sannyasin, a particle of his renunciation was vainly to be looked for in all this triple universe. The truth of this fact, says Thakur Brindavandas, writing of events that were still fresh in the minds of all the people, is patent to all. The renunciation of Sri Gaur Sundar is never possible in any other person. Those who represent Sri Gaur Sundar as engaged in amorous pastimes with his mistresses in the manner of his activities of the Pralila commit an unpardonable offense against the canons of historical as well as spiritual propriety. It is directly opposed to the testimony of Sri Brindavandas Thakur, who says clearly that at this period when Sri Gaur Sundar was exhibiting the Leela of a householder at Nabadwip, he was, indeed, a most restless and mischievous person who was full of arrogance, but with one most significant reservation, viz. He altogether abstained then and throughout his career from the society or discourse of women for indulgence in amorous pastimes as enjoyer. He exhibited all along the role of the ideal servant of Krishna who is exclusively devoted to his Lord and absolutely free from any hankering for enjoyment on his own account. Certain sections of Sri Chaitanya's professed followers, actuated by their worldly propensity, do not hesitate even from casting the aspersion of adulterous conduct on the perfectly abstemious character of Sri Gaur Sundar. This willful and gross misrepresentation of a historical fact only shows the depths of the utter degradation to which the human nature is liable to fall by its efforts to comprehend the doings of the divinity under the dictates of its irrepressible hankering for sensuous enjoyment. It is for this reason that the contemplation of the conduct of the devotees of Krishna has been extolled by the scriptures as being of greater help to souls striving for spiritual amelioration than even the doings of the Lord himself. Because the latter are liable to be wholly misunderstood by those who do not properly realize the supreme necessity of being instructed therein by the transcendental preceptor who leads the perfectly unworldly life and who is thereby enabled to have the right understanding of the divine activities of Sri Krishna, who is altogether unintelligible even to the candid worldly mind that pretends to seek for the real truth. By such willful distortion of the Leela of Sri Gaur Sundar, these insincere and thoughtless people only prevent themselves and others who are minded like themselves from realizing the true nature of the genuine devotee whom it was the object of Sri Gaur Sundar to make known to us by his own divine conduct and teaching. Unless and until we learn to follow the teaching of Sri Gaur Sundar, we can never realize the true nature of the activities of the Lord in his avatara in the different ages by reference to their source. For the same reason, a conditioned soul must never try to ape the transcendental conduct of the servants of Krishna, because the activities of the unalloyed devotees cannot be understood except by their mercy, that is to say, except by unconditional submission with body, mind and speech to the servant of the Absolute. It is not enough to have listened to the words of the devotee without submitting to be fully guided in our every act. On the transcendental plane there is no difference between idea and word and object denoted by them. This has to be realized not by persisting to differentiate between them while undergoing discipleship under a sadhu, but by submitting to realize them as an indivisible whole in our practice as well. So long as we actually retain an idea of our present disloyal conviction that they are separate from one another and that the absolute truth can be realized by merely exercising our intellect in the same way in which we find out the so-called truths of our worldly experience, we are doomed to deceive both ourselves and others by willfully and profoundly confounding, against the imperative dictates of our own unalloyed reason, the material with the spiritual. Or, one may fall into deception of the opposite kind and ape the external conduct of a sadhu without caring to listen, with sufficient attention and with a serving disposition, to his words regarding Krishna. This will make one's conduct a mechanical performance and also prevent the due realization of the momentous fact that on the plane of the Absolute there is no such thing as unintelligibility, i.e., absence of the fullest cognition. Every act of the servant of Krishna is instinct with all real cognitive significance, not in the imagined, figurative, or transferred but undivided absolute sense. The words of the sadhu have to be lived if one is sincerely willing to realize their true significance. Hence there arises the necessity of complete submission to the bona fide spiritual guide at all stages of spiritual endeavor. The doings of Krishna are not cognizable even to his own servants unless he is pleased to let them know. The activities of Sri Gaur Sundar, although he exhibits the Leela of the devotee, are not intelligible to any person except by means of his special grace vouchsafed through his servants. The arrogance of Nimai Pandit deceived everybody in regard to his real nature. He appeared even to the Vaishnavas as an atheistical pedant whose only ambition was to acquire the reputation of the greatest scholar of his time. They confounded him with those really egotistic pedants who abounded in Nabadwap and who were the worst enemies of the true religion, inasmuch as in their role of teachers of the religion they supported their impieties by the authority of the holy scriptures. They are the Putanas who abound in a controversial age, and it was necessary to stop their mouths if the religion is not to be stifled at its birth. It is the nature of Krishna to deal with everybody at his own weapons. He is the servant of his servants and the terror of his enemies. The ideal devotee of Krishna, Sri Gaur Sundar, possessed by right of his devotion all these qualities of Krishna himself. He was dealing with the atheistical teachers of religion on their own plane where alone, indeed, they could be met, although they did not deserve such aggressive mercy. But the Lord himself must not, therefore, be supposed as belonging to their plane. By this conduct Sri Gaur Sundar was trying to help them in the only way that would be intelligible to them, viz. By proving the insufficiency of their polemics and thereby making it clear that they could not understand the real meaning of the scriptures. The pride and arrogance of the Lord humbled even those proud and arrogant atheists who had grown hoary in the practice of sophistry and were too bad to be reformed in any less violent way. This is the case of all empiricists, more or less, of this day or that. They really understand nothing, but always act as they know everything. They only submit to the sophist who is a greater juggler than themselves. Such polemical defeat serves to confirm them more strongly in the wisdom of their suicidal course. But if the art of the juggler is used not to confirm but rescue the juggler from his favorite self-deception, such remedial jugglery is thereby raised to the level of the service of Krishna, who wishes to rescue all perverse souls by their own cooperating free choice. Sri Gaur Sundar set the example of such service in his Leela as ideal householder and teacher. It is the duty of all scholars and teachers, if they want to be saved from self-deception and to prevent others from being deceived by their pedantic untruths, to accept unreservedly the service of the absolute truth as the only goal of their endeavors, and, when they find him, to assert him against all who parade such untruths as the medicine authorized by the scriptures of all the ills of our mortal estate. If this ideal of teachership were adopted, it would really cure all distempers that the flesh is heir to, which can be healed by no other method. The distinctive feature of the teaching of Sri Gaur Sundar is causeless and unbounded mercy to all souls. The very fullness of his mercy stands in the way of the realization of its nature, and specially by those pedantic worldlings who are proud of their own missupposed worth and are thereby led to prescribe their nostrums for the undoing of their unfortunate admirers. Those who mechanically follow the dictums of Vaishnavism or revealed religion, i.e., all Pharisees, also necessarily fail to understand the supreme mercy of Sri Gaur Sundar. Sri Gaur Sundar sets no value on conduct that is not inspired by unalloyed love for the Absolute. He teaches the function that breaks through all rules and conventions for the purpose of acting up to the fountainhead of all rules and conventions. He sets his face against all forms of self-complacency that is unduly vain of its laurels. The pure soul knows no inferior and has no taste for pedantic sophistry for procuring any worldly laurels. He strives under all circumstances to realize the unconditional service of the Absolute. He has no selfish inclination and no suspicion that anything may not benefit himself. He knows spontaneously by his open-hearted experience of the reality that to serve the Absolute in all manner and under all circumstances is the only proper function. The service of the Absolute is capable of being realized and equally liable to be missed under every form. Those who fix their attention on the external form can never understand the behavior of the real servants of the Absolute. No Pharisee can understand why Godhead sends the pouring showers of his mercy on the just and the unjust. In this case, the nature of the source from whom the conduct proceeds spiritualizes the whole act. Those who confound spirit with matter, the Absolute with the relative, cannot understand, due to want of candor, how that which is apparently opposed to their experience of this world can be necessarily true on the plane of the Absolute. But their stupidity happily does not abolish the truth himself. The arrogance of the Pharisee misjudges the quality of the magnanimous arrogance of Sri Gaur Sundar. This is the wholly deserved punishment of the hypocrite. It is the only method by which even the Pharisee is saved, and those who are needlessly vain of their worldly virtues are enlightened regarding their real function towards others. It is the nature of Krsna to excel every entity in whatever he does, with a single exception. Krsna is always excelled by his devotee. One day the Lord happened to be passing along the public streets in the company of a number of his students who crowded on all sides of him. The Lord was as richly dressed as a king. He was clad in a yellow robe, like Krsna. His lips were dyed with the betel and his holy face had the splendor of a million moons. All the people were praising him. They said, "He is verily the God of love himself who has put on his visible body." On his forehead shone the tilaka mark pointing upwards. His beautiful hands held his books. The glance of his lotus eyes dispelled all sorrow. The Lord was coming along merrily, swinging his arms, in the company of his students who were naturally of a most restless disposition. Sribas Pundit fell in with him on the way quite by accident and burst into laughter as he caught sight of the Lord. Nimai Pundit made obeisance to Sribas. The generous Sribas blessed him by way of response, saying, "Live thou forever." Sribas then laughingly asked, "Whither goest thou, crest jewel of the arrogant? Why waste thy time in these vanities foregoing to serve Krishna? Why dost thou teach thy students so, night and day without respite? Why do people read at all? Is it not to learn devotion to Krishna? If that is not gained, what does such learning avail? For this reason be well advised not pass all thy time in such vanity. Thou hast studied till now. It is high time for thee to serve Krishna without delay." The Lord replied smiling, "Be assured, revered Pundit, what you say will certainly come to pass by your grace." Saying this, the Lord proceeded smiling to the bank of the Ganges and there rejoined the body of his pupils. Sribas Pundit, a Brahmana advanced in years, was accustomed to treat Sri Gaur Sundar in the manner of a superior and well-wisher who regarded his junior as an object of his affectionate concern. Regarded from the point of view of reverential service, such conduct towards Godhead must appear as improper. The same kind of objection would apply equally to Sandipani Muni, teacher of Krishna, to Garga Muni, who was family priest of the chief of Bra, and, in Gaur, Leela, to Brahmananda Puri, co-disciple of Sri Isvarapuri. It is, however, a comparatively poor conception of our relationship with Krishna to suppose that it should be confined to distant reverence for the high and mighty Godhead. The idea of the Absolute involved in the forms of reverential worship is somewhat analogous to our conduct in this world, where the sentiment of reverence precludes all really familiar intimacy. If a person who is situated on the plane of this world affects to conduct himself towards Krishna as towards his chum or junior, he certainly perpetrates the grossest impropriety. The philanthropists, Prakrita Sahajiyas, pretend to think that it is possible to adopt the attitude of confidential intimacy found in this world towards Sri Krishna while we are in the sinful state in imaginary imitation of the similar feasible relationships of the absolute world without committing the grossest profanation. At the same time, it would be no less untrue to suppose that the method of distant reverence itself is, therefore, the only or proper kind of service of the divinity. The method of distant reverence is based on an incomplete view of the absolute and does not, therefore, belong to the highest plane. It is shy and diffident. It is also indicative of a certain reserve of love. Reverential service is of course not to be confounded with any form of hypocritical philanthropism. It is wholly free from all error of judgment and is bound to develop by directing its closer attention to its immature service of the absolute. Contented reverential service, nevertheless, resembles that of the overjoyed traveler who builds his halfway house and prepares to settle down in it permanently under the impression that he has reached the goal. It is not easy to persuade such a traveler to resume his forward journey, especially if he has already built a solid structure and is supported by a strong body of admirers and colleagues of real purity of purpose. This is the form of service that is attainable in the majestic realm of Vaikuntha, which supplies the ideal of the current religions. The latter are, however, really a veiled form of quasi-worldliness and often tantamounts to a religious refusal to seek the fullest service of the absolute. Reverential worship, especially in its degenerate forms, has proved the determined foe of all impartial and thorough inquiry in the domain of religion, no less effective than the pseudo-authoritative methods that were once prevalent in the sphere of worldly knowledge. This unnatural form of worldliness, aping the real service of Vaikuntha, has been accepted as the only legitimate form of religion by all worldly persons who have been prepared to justify their practices by a sort of ridiculous assumption that religion is necessarily opposed to science, i.e., to the principle of free inquiry. But neither need the defect of the current forms of religious orthodoxy lead any but a deliberately foolish or wicked person to the serious conclusion that there is no such thing as the absolute truth, whose admitted existence is certainly the only real obstacle in the way of all irresponsible free thinking so much affected by empiricists. Chapter Z. The ideal householder. Professor Nimai used to stroll in the streets of the city in the company of his pupils. Men of the highest rank stepped down from their conveyances to accost him as they came across him on his way and made obeisance to his feet with all humility. All persons felt an instinctive awe on meeting the Lord. There was none in the whole of Nabadwap who did not now unreservedly admit his preeminence as a scholar. Whenever a citizen performed any religious function, he made it a point, as was the custom of the times, to send offerings of food and clothing to the house of the Lord. Householder Nimai Pandit was most open-handed in spending money. With lordly magnanimity he gave to the needy and the distressed unceasingly and without stint. Gorhari thus gave away rice, clothing and money to the poor most generously whenever he chanced to meet them. There was a constant arrival of chance guests at the house of the Lord. The Lord gave to all in the measure due to each. Sometimes a dozen or score of sannyasins would turn up all on a sudden. The Lord would joyfully invite them all to his house, sending word to his mother for immediately providing the alms of cooked food for a score of sannyasins. His mother was sometimes put to great perplexity for want of sufficient eatables in the house for meeting these peremptory demands, or her son. But such anxiety was always relieved by the automatic arrival of all requisites from unknown quarters. Lakshmi Devi would then cook the food most gladly and with special care. The Lord personally watched her cooking and personally attended to the feeding of the sannyasins, never relaxing his attentions till their actual departure. He spared no pains to please his guests. The merciful Lord welcomed every chansegist in this hospitable manner. The Supreme Lord taught all householders, by his own example, their most distinctive function. The principal duty of every householder, said the Lord, is to serve all his chance guests. I call that person even worse than birds and beasts who, being a householder, does not serve his chance guests. If one happens to be destitute of every necessary by reason of ill luck due to his previous bad deeds, he should still gladly spread for the chansegist some straw as a seat, and offer him water and resting ground. No good man can be without these. Let such a person speak out truly and let him express his regret for not being able to do more. Such loyal conduct would save him from the terrible offense of inhospitality. If one serves sincerely and with a glad heart according to his means, his proper duty to his chance guest is thereby duly performed. Thus taught Sri Gaur Sundar, and his own conduct bears out his teaching. Thakur Brindabandas, commenting on the above, observes that those chance guests to whom Lakshmi and Narayana made the gift of their food were certainly most fortunate. Even Brahma himself and his following always pin their hopes of deliverance on food from the hands of the Lord himself. This supremely coveted food was obtained by any and every chance comer. It was truly most wonderful. There are those who opine otherwise. These maintain that no lesser beings are ever in any way eligible to be recipients of such food. And the Brahma, Siva, Sukha, Vyasa, Narada, and the head of all the gods, all the self-realized souls and all eternally free souls came thither in the forms of mendicants, apprised of the appearance of Lakshmi and Narayana at Nabadwap. Otherwise who else have power to be there? Who else but Brahma and those who are on a level with him can ever be fit to obtain that food? Others, however, hold that the descent of the Lord into this world was for the purpose of delivering all the miserable. The Lord ever relieves the distressed in every way. Brahma and the other gods are his own limbs and the limbs of those limbs. They are ever and in every way the associates of the Lord. But there is his own special promise regarding this particular appearance. I will give all jivas what is attainable with difficulty by Brahma and his peers. It is for this reason that the Lord offered his food at his own house to all the distressed. Charity to the poor and unstinted hospitality to all chance guests are recommended by the scriptures as the principal duty of all householders. The Varnashrama system permits a person to marry, set up as a householder and pursue an honest trade or profession for earning his livelihood. But no householder must cook any food for his own consumption. He must always cook only for the Lord. Neither should he amass wealth for the livelihood of himself and his family. He may accumulate wealth in order to relieve the distressed and for performing the duty of unstinted hospitality to all chance guests. Miserliness is unreservedly condemned. A Brahmana, i.e., one who sincerely professes to lead a regulated spiritual life, is distinguished by this quality of liberality in the spending of his wealth. He must be perfectly open-handed. It is his nature and also his duty to employ his wealth for relieving distress. It is his duty to give liberally food, clothing and money. It is also his duty to serve and accumulate a certain amount of wealth for this purpose. It is his duty to give with an easy mind. There is no higher duty for a householder than this. This is clearly opposed to the ideal of the worldly economists who favor the method of niggardly doles for relieving distress. Indiscriminate or lavish charity is considered by the economists as harmful both to the giver and the recipient of such charity. The recipient of indiscriminate charity is supposed to be encouraged thereby to lead the idle life of a parasite. The giver of such charity is accordingly supposed to be a conscious or an unconscious abettor of unprincipled idleness. It is, therefore, supposed to be the duty of a householder not to countenance any form of begging. That form of charity alone is permitted by the economists which is exercised for helping people to lead an industrious life. This discrimination is strongly inculcated by all modern economists. But Sri Caitanya makes no reservation in regard to hospitality to chance guests. As a matter of fact, the charitable disposition itself asserts ill with the principle of discrimination. Is a professional beggar really a great nuisance as he is ordinarily supposed to be by the economists? He is the inevitable product of the practice recommended by the uncharitable economist. He is the natural and salutary check on the social triumph of undiluted industrialism. Would the world be an ideal place if it be inhabited solely by uncharitable, rich misers? Is not miserliness after all quite definitely and logically traceable to the same selfish instinct that produces the professional beggar at the other end? Those who discourage indiscriminate charity indirectly encourage miserliness by their deprecation of the vice of improvidence. The economic view cannot be free from this grave defect. The real danger of all those who live to eat is due to their besetting desire for the cultivation of undiluted selfishness. This latter is the root cause of all economic and other troubles of this world. It is, therefore, necessary to insist that the householder must give up the ideal of calculated selfishness if he is to be really at peace with himself and the world. The miser need not suppose that he is a better man than the beggar. Both of them are in equal danger of becoming selfish by the avoidance of their duty by one another. The householder can be cured of his selfishness not by so-called discriminate or no charity, but only by true magnanimity. Those who advocate saving in order to increase the capital of a country only extend the application of the principle of exclusive selfishness to the sphere of national economy with its corresponding disastrous result. A nation which lives only to eat is no better than the uncharitable householder whose case has been considered above. The bubble of the fashionable capitalistic theory will be pricked, and is in course of being pricked, by the rival principle of unselfish brotherly cooperation, for multiplying the so-called necessaries and luxuries, for a higher purpose than that of selfish enjoyment by the nation or the individual. That higher purpose is in reserved service of Godhead, which, however, cannot be understood by those who are too exclusively absorbed in the pursuit of the alternative lines of the selfish ideal. But it may be urged that the ideal of unselfish living sketched above has also its danger. An unselfish individual and nation are liable to be exploited by the selfish. This is no doubt true. But is it really harmful to any party? The Varnashrama system was never properly followed in this country. It is bound to be recognized as the best social arrangement possible in this world, and as the only one that offers the least opposition to the goal of spiritual living. The special hospitality shown by Sri Gaurasundar to sannyasins points to a spiritual duty on the part of the householder who aims at the attainment of a higher than the merely economic plane of living. By the practice of open-door hospitality alone, the householder is brought into proper touch with those who keep up the ideal of spiritual service of the Lord in the form that is least likely to be misunderstood by the economic householder. The institution of asceticism, sannyasa, is the distinguishing feature of the Varnashrama system. It is the fourth stage in the life of a person belonging to the system. The other three being Brahmacharya, period of spiritual training, Garhastya, householder life, and Vanaprastha, period of retirement from domestic life. The yati or sannyasin does not cook for himself. He may accept food cooked by the twice-born, who, being worshippers of Vishnu, cook only for the Lord. No articles of food may be offered to Vishnu that may cause pain to any sentient being or stimulate animal passion. Hence there should be no objection on the part of sannyasins to accept food cooked by Brahmana householders. But no sannyasin may settle down at any place other than the abode of the Lord. A sannyasin must continuously move from place to place for the benefit of those who lead a stationary life. A sannyasin has no other purpose than to serve the pleasure of Vishnu. He is the guru or spiritual guide of all persons belonging to the other three stages. It is the duty of every householder to hospitably receive him with the greatest honor. It is the duty of the householder to offer his best hospitality to the sannyasin who is always a chance guest. It is also his duty to receive the sannyasins with the greatest honor that is due to the order of the spiritual teachers of society. The sannyasin is the chance guest whom Sri Gaurasundar specifically teaches all householders as in duty bound to honor. According to the Varnashrama system, no person is to be permitted to lie for himself. The professional beggars are no exception to this rule. But neither the professional beggar nor the self-centered householder is a fit member of the society that is organized for serving the spiritual, and although they are tolerated and given the chance of improvement by the generous provision of the system, the loyal members of the system never lie unto themselves and are therefore neither selfish householders nor professional beggars. Although all householders are required by the system to tolerate and cherish even disloyal persons for the purpose of mutual improvement, the professional beggar and miserly householder necessarily claim the lion's share of hospitality of every loyal household in a society in which they happen to form the majority of members. It is not laid down in the Shastras that there is any obligatory duty of hospitality toward those guests who insist on staying at a place for more than a single day at a time. From this provision it appears that the obligatory duty of householders towards chance guests really refers to the sannyasins. The poor and the distressed are also mentioned in the Shastras as objects of charity, but it is carefully laid down that charitable gifts to such persons would benefit the giver and the receiver in the worldly sense only. But the hospitality to the chance guest is recommended on the ground that it produces spiritual benefit to the householder without the necessity of his having to try to find sadhus by undertaking journeys that are also enjoined to holy places where only the sadhus are to be ordinarily met with. Every householder was provided by means of such organized hospitality with the opportunity of spiritual communion with the sadhus coming to his door by serving them for his own benefit. In this duty all members of his family could also participate and be benefited thereby. It is not merely social benefit which would be secured by this practice, but an inclination for the spiritual service of the Lord without which no so-called social good is worth a brass farthing. The institution of sannyasins is, of course, also liable to degenerate. Those sannyasin who do not serve the Lord are even worse than mere professional beggars. There has been an enormous increase of both species of beggars, as is to be expected in this world. But those professional beggars who pass themselves off as sannyasins in order to exploit the religious homage of the good householders are also liable to be benefited by having to conform to the rules of the order, which require every sannyasin to keep aloof from all association with the other sex and strictly discourage all accumulation of wealth, fixity of habitation and luxurious living. Those professional beggars with the garb of sannyasins who observe none of these rules should be regarded as mere scoundrels who must not certainly be honored as the spiritual teachers of the community. But it should be possible for every householder, with a clear realization of the true principles of the Varnashrama system, to practice unstinted charity and goodwill towards all persons in the measure that is due to each. But the claim of pseudo-sannyasins to be the authorized spiritual teachers of the community should not also be seriously entertained on any shastric principle. They may be sent away with kind words and outward respect due to their garb, and may be given the bare necessaries of life of which they may actually stand in need. There is, however, another and a higher aspect of the matter. Sri Gaur Sundar was playing the part of a devotee in the position of a householder. Those who were the recipients of the favor of his hospitality were undoubtedly most fortunate. Who then could be those who are really worthy of such high fortune? Do Brahma and other great beings on a level with Brahma stand in need of such favor? Even they, say the scriptures, fail to attain the supreme mercy of such favor. Judged by the test of eligibility, however, they ought to have a preferential claim to such favor. So it is maintained by those who take this view that the householder Leela of the Supreme Lord, acting the part of the ideal devotee, was intended for favoring Brahma and other great personages who availed the opportunity by presenting themselves in the garb of chance guests and beggars in distress. Food, clothing, rice, a seat, anything offered by the Lord has power to benefit everyone in the fullest measure. Brahma and other great beings are no exceptions to the rule. There can be no true greatness save by the favor of the Lord. One who attains such greatness by divine grace is enabled to realize more and more the infinite mercy involved in the eternal necessity of having to be the recipients of the divine favor. Unless the Lord is pleased by one's activity, it has no value whatsoever. Its contribution to the pleasure of the Lord constitutes the sole and supreme value of all activity for the lowest of jivas as for the highest. Those who want to serve the Lord without desiring to be favored have a very poor idea of spiritual service. It is by all means the only natural function of the soul to desire the divine favor in every way. It is unnatural for the soul to desire any favor from any other quarter. Those who have no hankering for the divine favor can have no experience of his real nature. This fatal stupor is curable only by the causeless mercy of the Lord, which is apparently unnecessarily and indiscriminately showered on all. Those jivas who fail to be reclaimed by the divine favor have equal reason to be grateful to the Supreme Lord, who mercifully permits the fullest liberty of choice to all souls even against his own perfectly beneficent dispensation. It was, therefore, no departure from the principle of absolute causelessness of the manifestation of divine mercy, but really the most brilliant fulfillment that is noticeable in the activities of the Supreme Lord as householder, in bestowing his favor, coveted by Brahma, Shiva, and all highest personages, indiscriminately on all. This conduct of the Supreme Lord also places before us, in true amplitude, the incalculable range of the beneficence of the activities of the bona fide Vaishnava householder. The Lord's purpose was to vindicate the function of his devotee. The favor of his devotee is superior in the quality of graciousness even to that of the Lord himself. The devotee is eternally engaged in doing good, of which the recipients are unconscious, to those fallen souls who are deliberately opposed to the willing service of the Lord. This unsolicited favor from his devotee is the sole unknown cause of eligibility for the conscious and willing service of the Lord that is slowly manifested in all conditioned souls who are thus favored. Rice, clothing and money which conditioned souls readily accept from the Vaishnava householder under the merciful pressure of destitution, or even from the desire to beg by assuming the garb of a spiritual mendicant, possess the power of healing our aversion to the Lord that is equal to that of the direct mercy vouchsafed by the Lord himself to conscious and grateful recipients. Everything possessed by a Vaishnava householder belongs wholly to the Lord in the special sense that the devotee is fully conscious of the sole proprietorship of the Lord and is also eligible to act up to his conviction. His charity is, therefore, to be distinguished from that of one who usurps a thing by the right of pseudo-proprietorship. Whatever is therefore accepted, given away or retained by the true devotee is done on behalf of the Lord and, therefore, possesses the spiritual quality imparted to an object due to its spiritual dedication to the service of the Lord, viz., that of delivering those concerned in the same from the bondage of this world. The food that is offered by the devotee to the Lord is called Mahaprasadam after acceptance by the Lord. Those who accept Mahaprasadam thereby consciously or unconsciously progress towards the activity of spiritual service. The remainder of the Mahaprasadam, after being honored by the devotee, is termed Mahaprasadam, who possesses even greater efficacy than the prasadam as he produces faith in the spiritual nature of the devotee. All this is implied in the hospitable activities of the Lord acting the part of a Vaishnava householder. If any trace of doubt is still left in the minds as regards the necessity of a Vaishnava householder serving Vaishnava sannyasins arriving at his house as chance guests, it may be observed that the Vaishnava householder does not aspire to favor, help or benefit anybody but serves all persons with whom he has any dealings. One who fancies himself to be a Vaishnava is a hypocrite. The Vaishnava is really and fully aware of his inferiority to every other entity, all of whom are viewed by him as objects engaged in the service of the Lord who are to be honored as properties and servants of his master. The devotee alone is, therefore, fully eligible for consciously serving the Vaishnava sannyasins and understands the real value of their mercy in visiting unsolicited the homes of householders under the direction of the Lord, in order to afford them an opportunity of serving the Lord in the best manner by showing hospitality to themselves. This function of hospitality is capable of being fully discharged only by the Vaishnava householder who is in a position to understand its necessity and high value for all concerned. From the point of view of the householder, the spiritual value of the obligatory duty of hospitality to all chance guests consists in its being the necessary supplement of the begging and peripatetic guiding function of the sannyasins. The value of such hospitality increases in proportion as its significance is realized and embodied in the act. The external activity is liable to be abused by the misconception of its real nature. But the abrogation of the duty which is so emphatically and clearly enjoined by the Shastras on all householders involves the fatal danger of breeding disbelief in the spiritual principle. One who is really anxious to find out the duty of a householder should be careful to avoid the mistakes of supposing it to be a merely mechanical activity on the one hand or as the product of designing hypocrisy or ignorant simplicity on the other. The householder should exercise his hospitality discriminately and must always pay due attention to the spiritual import. The modern institutions of public almshouses, hospitals and other charitable organizations err by trying to remove only the worldly miseries and wants of those whom they desire to serve. The husk is ostentatiously dangled before the greedy imaginations of self-deluded souls who are deliberately disposed to prefer it to the grain which tastes bitter to their diseased palates. These institutions, if they are to do the maximum good to mankind, should change their principles of management and objective by subordinating unconditionally the worldly point of view to the spiritual. The present discriminating worldly charity which they dispense should give place to indiscriminate spiritual charity. This applies equally to individual householders who make a show of benefiting the needy and the destitute and other chance guests by practicing covert arrogance in the name of serving hospitality. To the purely worldly understanding, the product and the punishment of egotistic vanity which is the proper negation of the principle of spiritual service, these considerations are unfortunately apt to seem visionary and unpractical. Those who deliberately choose to regard the perverted reflection as being itself the substance of which it really happens to be the shadow, have no other alternative but to continue to behave perversely. Lakshmi Devi cooked the meals of the family by herself, unassisted, and yet experienced the greatest happiness in the performance of this duty. Most fortunate Mother Sachi, watching this behavior of Lakshmi, felt a great and early increase of her gladness. From early dawn Lakshmi performed all the duties of the household alone by herself. This was her nature, or religion. She drew the circles of the svastika in the shrine for Godhead and the figures of the conch and the disc with great care. She made every preparation for the worship of the Lord by perfumes, flowers, incense, lighted lamp and well-scented water. She constantly served the Tulasi and applied her mind, with even greater assiduity, to the service of Sachi Devi. By observing this conduct of Lakshmi, Sri Gaur Sundar did not say anything openly but felt glad at heart. On some days, taking into her arms the feet of the Lord, Lakshmi Devi would continue to tend them for a while. Once Sachi had a most wonderful vision. She saw a most brilliant massive tongue of fire burning under the feet of her son. On some days Mother Sachi scented a great perfume of the lotus flower everywhere about the rooms, doors and windows, that also never ceased. Thus at Nabadwap abode Lakshmi and Narayana hiding themselves, and so no one could know. Then, after some time had passed in this manner, the Lord, who is ever full of every wish, had a desire of beholding the country of East Bengal. The Lord thereupon spoke to his mother to the effect that he intended to go out of home for a few days. Shri Gaur Sundar said to Lakshmi to serve the mother unceasingly. Thereafter the Lord, taking with him a few favored students, started for East Bengal, with great pleasure. In the above paragraph I have tried to reproduce the words of Shri Brindabandas Thakur. They afford a glimpse into the ideal of the relationship of the loyal wife to her God-fearing husband in this world. Shri Lakshmi Devi is the ideal servant of her husband's household. There is no one else to assist her. Mother Sachi as well as Shri Gaur Sundar are recipients of her help. She occupies the unconditional subordinate position. There is no question of equality of status or function. Her duties lie within the household and are not shared by her husband or mother-in-law. Her principal work is to make careful arrangements for the worship of Vishnu, decorate his shrine by drawing the figures that are emblematic of the powers of the Lord, tend the tulasi and attend constantly on Sachi Devi. She cooks and serves the meals offered by the family to Godhead. She tends the feet of Shri Gaur Sundar. She works from early dawn till late at night. She does all this with a perfectly loyal and glad heart. This is no doubt wholly opposed to worldly ideas regarding the proper position of the wife in the household of her husband. It appeals to neither the mundane intellect nor to the mundane connubial sentiment. The life seems to be too mechanical, too narrow and too much subordinated. It does not at all provide for the bodily and mental comforts of the wife. It severely curtails the sphere of her activities to the inside of the house of her husband. There is no variety of work, no provision for leisure or other recreation. There is strangely enough little reference to the sexual conjugal love. It may not be unnaturally supposed that all this may be convenient from the point of view of the elders, but are not likely to be relished either by the husband or, least of all, by the overworked wife herself, who is crushed by a system of sheer, joyless, purposeless slavery which can only make her gradually lose even the energy of making any piteous protests. The mother-in-law is the standing dread of a worldly wife who considers it physically impossible to please superimposed elderly mistress at her elbow whose tastes are bound to differ radically from hers. The difference between willing rational service and slavery is real and need not be overlooked. If one submits to another from a sense of duty and in pursuance of a rational object, such submission becomes necessarily differentiated from slavery. The quantity or nature of the work that may be performed is no proof of its slavish character. What should be the proper object of every household? The atheistic conception seems to be that the household is the product of the sensuous outlook and its object is to satisfy our mundane cravings in an effective manner. Work and leisure, according to such view, should be so arranged that no undue excess of either may produce harmful bodily or mental discomfort. Liberty of choice in the selection of work and the method of its performance is regarded as the keystone of the arch of social and domestic felicity. Although the danger of anarchy in both domestic and social government is also admitted, the two objectives of the household system of this democratic age of equality are maximum personal liberty and maximum personal comfort of every inmate. The outlook is of course worldly. Those who are disposed to defend the system of purdah and subordination of the wife to her husband do so because they believe that the worldly ends are likely to be better served by the adoption of those methods. As a matter of fact, inequality in work, temperament and ability are hard facts of our everyday experience that cannot be abolished by simply overlooking their existence from a conviction of the sheer impossibility of harmonizing all discordant differences. If the object of the household institution be to secure the maximum possible worldly enjoyment for every member, it is not possible to devise any arrangement by which this is really attainable. The full cup of domestic happiness is liable to be dashed in an instant by a solitary whisper, and the mischief cannot be healed by the shibboleths of liberty and equality, or by the elaborate cunning of a complicated worldliness. The worldly end in itself is the Tantalus cup, and it gives its deluding character to all the details of the system. It is the worldly end which really destroys the peace of the household and is bound to prevent the attainment of any really satisfactory result. The sole object of the household institution should be to serve the Supreme Lord if it is the purpose to produce real peace and harmony, possible only by spiritual association. Neither the wife nor any other member should aim at personal comfort, nor should be encouraged to do so. But it is not possible to instill into any individual member the principle of unselfishness unless the same forms also the accepted principle of all members of the household. The service of the Supreme Lord alone can impress upon all unselfish persons the necessity and desirability of its adoption as the only unconditional common function of all members of every household. The Supreme Lord can be served only if he happens to be a person essentially like ourselves, if he condescends to receive our service. But it does not remove all difficulties, although it establishes the reality of the serving function. If the service of the Lord resembles the so-called service that is ordinarily offered to a human being, the difficulties connected with the latter will recur in the proposed function. A human being normally desires the satisfaction of his personal needs and is prepared to do willingly what promises such satisfaction. The only difficulty in this case is that he does not know what can actually satisfy him. He is constantly in search of such satisfaction by the adoption of the available defective methods due to his natural want of judgment and capacity. It is for this reason that he is doomed to suffer from perpetual dissatisfaction. Moreover, there is no reasonable guarantee that the methods adopted by him for the unattainable ideal of complete personal satisfaction of himself as a human being will be, in every case, promotive of the similar satisfaction of those whose services he must require for his purpose. This uncertainty in regard to both is reflected in the modern democratic cry of liberty and equality, showing that those interests have not been served by the unchecked pursuit of selfish happiness by each individual human being, however high the individualistic ideal may be regarded to be in the abstract. But the proposed democratic method has also its own defect. It quite unnaturally ignores all real differences of capacity, taste and character of the individuals. No lasting habitable structure can be expected to be built on radically unnatural and fallacious assumptions. The attempt is bound to produce fresh causes of discord and disappointment. The common service of the Supreme Lord should be acceptable if it be really free from the above defect and thus ensure the attainment of the maximum satisfaction of the individual and the community. Vishnu is the only person whose plans for his own personal satisfaction are ever productive of a perennial variety of conditions of the highest and lasting general and individual satisfactions of all jivas. The plans of Vishnu benefit everybody, even those who willfully abstain from receiving the benefit from a deliberate misunderstanding of the nature of the divine personality. The atheists are mistaken in being afraid of losing their independence of action if they have to unconditionally obey the Lord. If they have no rational objection to unconditionally obeying their own real nature, they can have none to obeying the Lord. By obeying the Lord, all souls are enabled to attain the complete natural function of their own proper selves. By disobeying him, the soul ceases to find either himself or his function. This is proved indirectly by the futility of every effort to institute the perfect household by the misguided soul's own independent effort, by ignoring his natural relationship to his Lord. The service of the Lord is the source of all knowledge, all existence and all satisfaction of all souls. If we do not submit to serve him, we naturally grope in utter darkness by mistaking darkness for light. The object of every endeavor of every soul should be to seek for the divine guidance if he really wants to attain his complete normal existence. The service of the Lord should, therefore, be the only legitimate object of all household and social institutions. In the household of Sri Gaur Sundar, every function was performed for pleasing the Supreme Lord. The practice of conjugal love is one of the most coveted objects of worldly life. It is also liable to degenerate into an abnormality due to the sensual nature of depraved man who is impelled by lust to deceive himself in regard to his sexual responsibilities. Marriage is a failure if it be regarded as a means of satisfying one's carnal appetites. The wedded husband and wife should not be less free from the offense of sexuality than the bachelor. They marry with the object of attaining perfect immunity from carnality by adopting the regulated conjugal life that leads to this spiritual result. Such conduct for such purpose is practiced in the service of the Supreme Lord. But this natural function can also be neither learned nor practiced except under spiritual guidance. The unassisted mentality of tiny individual souls does not enable them to realize their own supreme good. The rationality of the reason of man can itself be realized only by being rationalized by the all-knowledge and by consciously sharing in serving his cosmic plan. It is only in this way that one can escape the tyranny of his own native littleness. Religion is not a departmental affair, nor the special business of any particular set of people. It is the practice of the service of the truth in all affairs. But the truth cannot be fully served by the limited cognition of the conditioned soul. The truth in his proper nature is always full and immutable and is known only to the Supreme Soul, who has also the power to communicate himself to the multitude of individual souls. The truth cannot be known if one acts in opposition to the source of rationality. Conduct which is irrational is also improper and unnatural for a rational being. There can be no other test of impropriety. All conduct, therefore, ceases to be rational as soon as it neglects to receive inspiration from the source of all knowledge. No act can be irrational or undesirable that is done in conscious obedience to the will of the Absolute. The domestic duties of the loyal wife cease to be drudgery and slavishness if they are performed in conformity with the wishes of the Supreme Lord. The leisure, liberty and comforts of the worldly wife are the means of confirming her taste for dissipations that are bound to react in a most mischievous manner on her real self and on the souls of her aiders and abettors. The service of the Lord, who is perfectly free from all defect, is the only natural function of the pure cognitive essence of the free soul. In every work that a truly rational being undertakes there can be only one object, viz., to realize and carry out the wishes of Godhead. The conduct of Sri Lakshmi Devi belongs to the plane of the unconditional loving service of the Lord. The unity and concord of the household are fully secured by the willing and indefatigable exertions of the loyal God-fearing wife, and, at the same time, the only function of a perfectly rational existence in the form of the practice of loving devotion of Godhead is realized for herself by the service of those who thus employ her in their service of Godhead. If Sachi Devi had any desire for selfish enjoyment, she would have failed to have such high regard for her daughter-in-law. She accepted the services rendered to her by Sri Lakshmi Devi in the spirit in which they were rendered, viz., in order to honor her divine husband's mother, who possessed the spontaneous absorbing serving affection for her divine son. Sri Lakshmi Devi loved her husband on the plane that is absolutely free from all mundane passions attainable to one who is wholly dedicated to the service of the Lord. The Lord responded to her serving love by pursuing the role of the ideal devotee who serves Krishna with all his faculties. But at the bottom of it all lay her actual relationship with the Divine Personality, the fulfillment of whose wishes tantamounts to the successful performance of one's whole duty. The work of a menial is looked down upon, but it can never be banished from this world. It is similarly easy enough to sneer at the loyal wife who sets herself with perfect satisfaction to the exclusive performance of ordinary domestic duties. But the food cooked by Sri Lakshmi Devi is accepted by the Lord and benefits all who partake of the remains of the Lord's meal. The rich food cooked by atheists may minister to the pleasures of the palate of an Epicurean, but is never the great grace, Mahaprasadam, of the Lord that the other is. The humblest work that is performed for the Lord has the greatest potency and more than fully satisfies the utmost needs of all the faculties of our souls, because it is most fully free and rational. This makes spiritual conduct eternally different from the worldly and absolutely unintelligible to all worldlings. The personal subordination of the wife to the good husband makes her the mistress of the household in the sense that she is thereby enabled to have the right of serving every member in the way that is in keeping with the spiritual purpose. If she aspires to be the mistress in the sense of being allowed the right to lord it over the household, her position from the spiritual point of view would be worse than useless, inasmuch as she would altogether cease to render any service to the Lord. On the spiritual plane, the only admissible position for the soul is that of the servant of servants. In such case, however, neither the wife nor the husband is really servant or master of one another. Both are servants and servants of the servants of their common and only Lord. Any difference in the nature of their respective forms of service does not affect their natural status of exclusive servants of the Lord. Failure of duty towards the Lord would result if either party misunderstands his or her real status as servant of the Lord. Those who suppose that any authority can be exercised by any of us by the right of selfish enjoyment, the worldly sense of mastership, are thereby led to quarrel about precedence and status. In the spiritual institution of the household, precedence is accorded to the female over the male in the service of the servant of the Lord. The wife is truly honored above all other members in this way. This is the divine dispensation and is intended to curb the vanity of mastership and mistressship that are inborn to the conditioned state, which is disposed to exploit the difference of sex for selfish enjoyment. There would thus be no difficulty if we regard the arrangement enjoined by the Shastras from the point of view of our mutual service to our common and only Master. The personal service which was rendered by Sri Lakshmi Devi to her husband may be objected to by those females who are unduly addicted to sensuous enjoyment under the impression that it is the goal of all human endeavor. Such persons may be disposed to think that the life led by Sri Lakshmi Devi was too formal or too respectful or wanting in the qualities of sympathy and affection. But everyone will easily perceive the exquisite propriety of her conduct as being in perfect conformity with the requirements of the very highest spiritual service. This brings us to an important issue. The relationship of sensuous enjoyment is wholly forbidden to the conditioned soul, although it alone necessarily appears to him or her as the one thing needful. In place of such relationship which prevails in this world, and which is the root cause of all troubles of conditioned souls, is to be substituted the relationship of common service of the Supreme Lord by the employment of the senses, not for the gratification of one another but for the sole satisfaction of their only legitimate enjoyer. This institution of marriage is intended to lead to the realization of this relationship of spiritual service in the matter of sexual conduct. This is realized by honestly following the injunctions of the Shastras against the natural dictates of our worldly inclination. Enjoyment is the right reserved for the Supreme Lord, because He alone is the only Master. He alone possesses real authority over all persons, and its exercise also does not, for this reason, involve any untoward consequences. The true rational order of spiritual cosmos is set at naught by the unnatural proprietary ambitions of conditioned souls, who are by their spiritual nature servants of every spiritual entity and can never be the lords of any entity, because every entity, including themselves, is the exclusive servant of the Supreme Lord. The failure to realize the spiritual import of the conduct of Sri Lakshmi Devi is responsible for the sexual excesses that are sometimes practiced under the garb of following loyally the conduct of Sri Gaur Sundar as householder. Sri Gaur Sundar was pleased with the conduct of Sri Lakshmi Devi because it was in accordance with his own purpose, and showed his pleasure by commanding her to serve Sri Sachi Devi during his sojourn in East Bengal. Sri Gaur Sundar did not reward the loyal service of Sri Lakshmi Devi by relaxing his strictly regulated conduct towards her, but by giving her further opportunities of service of a higher order. The service of the servant of the Lord is higher than the direct service of the Lord himself. Whenever the Supreme Lord is pleased with the devoted service of a soul, he shows his appreciation of such devotion by conferring on him the higher privilege of serving his servants. The mother of Sri Gaur Sundar serves the Lord by the practice of parental affection. Sri Lakshmi Devi and Sri Tulasi Devi also serve the Lord by their respective aptitudes as consort and maid. Sri Lakshmi Devi also served Sri Tulasi. She now gave her whole service to Sri Sachi Devi. It was no disrespect to Sri Tulasi Devi on the part of Sri Lakshmi Devi to prefer the service of Sri Sachi Devi to that of Sri Tulasi, inasmuch as Sri Tulasi occupies a position of inferiority to the Mother of Godhead in the scale of reverence. As a matter of fact, however, the apparent indifference shown to the service of Sri Tulasi by Sri Lakshmi Devi in comparison with her reverential and constant attendance on Sri Sachi Devi was the better way of serving also Sri Tulasi. The activities of Sri Gaur Sundar are, however, not fully grasped in all their surpassing excellence unless we remember the cardinal fact that he is actually the Supreme Lord himself. Sri Lakshmi Devi is the eternal consort of the Supreme Lord. The inexpressible mercy of these activities of the divine pair consists in this, that they play the roles of jiva souls, endeavoring to practice the exclusive service of the Lord in this world. The Lord does not appear in his role of enjoyer, lest he be misunderstood. But we are so grossly addicted to sensuous enjoyment that there are not wanting persons among us who have not scrupled to seek to detect the presence of mundane sensuous propensity even in this wonderfully transparent and unambiguous behavior of Sri Gaurandar towards Sri Lakshmi Devi. Sri Thakur Brindabandis dwells lovingly on the incidents of the sojourn of the Lord in eastern Bengal in the company of his students. The Lord progressed in his journey to East Bengal by slow stages. No one who had the good fortune of witnessing the Lord on his journey could take away his eyes from him. Females on catching sight of the Lord expressed the opinion that it is really worthwhile for the mother whose son is he to have been born at all. Let us therefore do humble obeisance to the feet of his mother. That maiden who has obtained such husband is also most fortunate. That excellent lady has obtained the highest goal of her womanly birth. Thus praised repeatedly and without stint every male and female who chanced to meet the Lord on his journey. The sight of the Lord, whom gods aspire to behold, was available to all persons. In this manner, moving slowly forward, Sri Gaur reached the bank of the Padmavati in course of several days' journey. The Padmavati possesses the charming beauty of her mighty waves and excellent banks which look as if planted with orchards. As the Lord caught sight of Padmavati, he sportively plunged into her water with his followers. From that day, sings Thakur Brindabandas, fortunate Padmavati acquired the efficacy to sanctify all the world. The river Padmavati is a most beautiful sight. Her waves, banks and strong current are most captivating. The Lord beheld the Padmavati, to her great good fortune, with the greatest pleasure, and took up his residence on her bank. The Padmavati thus obtained the same high favor which had fallen to the lot of the daughter of Janhu, the Bhagirathi. The Lord with his followers bathed daily in the water of the Padmavati and sported with the greatest ardor in her stream, just in the same way as he had done in the Ganges. Gaurchandra stayed for some time in the country of Vanga. It is for this reason that East Bengal is a blessed land to this day. The Lord abode on the bank of the Padmavati. All the people were very much gladdened by the happy tidings of his appearance in their midst. The tidings quickly spread in all directions that the greatest of professors, Nimai Pandit, had arrived in the country. All those worthy brahmanas, who were really fortunate, soon presented themselves before the Lord with appropriate offerings for the teacher for admission to the high privilege of his teaching. As they presented themselves before the Lord, they made their humble obeisance and supplicated for his favor with great humility, to the effect that it is by our great good fortune that it has come to happen that thou hast appeared in this country. The self-same person to whom we are wont to resort for our studies, carrying with us our treasure and family to distant Nabadwap, that rare treasure himself, has been brought bodily to our own door by the mercy of Godhead. Thou art the visible incarnation of Brihaspati himself. There is no other professor who is like thee. Even the parallel of Brihaspati is not worthy of thee. Thou seemst to be an integral portion of Godhead himself, as no one except the divinity can ever possess such scholarship and may attract so irresistibly the mind and treasure of all of us. We pray to thee for the gift of a little learning to all of us. May we humbly submit, best of the twice-born, that all of us do study and teach by the help of thy annotations, and have thereby received already the indirect benefit of thy most valuable instructions. May thou be pleased to make us also thy direct disciples, that thy fame may pervade the whole world. The Lord encouraged them by his smile, and for a period condescended to enact his pastimes of teacher in the country of East Bengal. By the force of this most fortunate event, writes Thakur Brindabandas, even to this day, all over the country of Bengal, males and females perform the congregational kirtan instituted by Sri Caitanya. The place, where Sri Gaur took up his residence during his stay in eastern Bengal, is not mentioned in any of the available records. Some maintain that it is the village of Magdoba in the district of Faridpur. It is necessary to note that the practice of the congregational kirtan initiated by Sri Caitanya, in which both males and females took a part, was found to be already well established in different parts of East Bengal shortly after the disappearance of Lord Caitanya, when Thakur Brindabandas wrote his immortal work. Thakur Brindabandas's account gives us the further interesting information that Nimai Pandit was the author of a gloss on the Kalapa Vyakarana, which was extensively used in the tolls of eastern Bengal. But we have not yet come across any copy of the gloss, if, indeed, one was ever actually penned by Sri Caitanya. This puts it beyond all doubt that the fame of Nimai Pandit as professor is far from being a myth concocted by his ignorant followers. The fact that the country of East Bengal with its great river was actually sanctified by the visit of the Supreme Lord, although the spiritual contention may not be really acceptable to the atheistical understanding, is the really momentous feature of the whole episode. There cannot be a greater fortune for a country than the personal presence of the Lord on its soil. The result is spiritual and eternal, but is impossible to trace in a form that appeals to the heart of persons immersed in secular affairs. There may come a time when it will be possible to write the inner history of the wonderful vicissitudes of conditioned souls during their sojourn in this world from before the beginning of time. The peripatetic tour of Nimai Pandit in East Bengal will appear in the true perspective in such a narrative as fraught with consequences that are not measurable in terms of any mundane value. It is necessary for the purpose of the present account to hint at the associated result. The land trod by the lotus feet of Sri Caitanya becomes the hallowed tirtha which it is the bounden duty of all Vaishnavas to visit. The country which is cherished by the Vaishnavas is afforded the only chance of attaining to the pure service of the Lord. The Lord was seen, as he really is, by many fortunate inhabitants of East Bengal, both male and female. The female realized him as the ideal son and husband. In the literature of the sect which calls itself Gaurnagaris, the fact, so clearly stated by Sri Brindavandas Thakur, has been willfully distorted in order to suit their theory that Nimai Pandit excited the passion of unconventional amor in all female beholders. But Nimai Pandit was the ideal husband and son and the teacher by his own personal example of the spiritual necessity of absolute abstinence from sexuality. The Supreme Lord in his pastimes as Sri Caitanya does not appear in his role of enjoyer and proprietor of all things. Sri Caitanya is not Sri Krishna as lover of others, but Sri Krishna as loving himself. The two roles are wholly different and cannot be confounded with one another. One who loves the Lord has no desire for his own enjoyment, whereas the Lord himself possesses an infinite desire for every form of enjoyment. The insatiable desire for enjoyment of the Lord provides the perennial opportunity of his service to all pure souls. It was the object of Sri Caitanya to show by his own conduct how this service is to be performed by the pure souls. For the conditioned soul accordingly the Leela of Sri Caitanya is unambiguously wholesome as affording him the chance of learning the service of the Supreme Lord by his own guidance and example. It is, therefore, necessary to be on one's guard against any willful distortion of the nature of these supremely magnanimous activities of the Lord. They are not identical with, but correspondent to, the Dvapra-lila of Sri Krishna. The necessity of this caution will appear from a consideration of the following facts recorded by Thakur Brindavandas to warn us against the fatal consequences of misrepresenting the teachings of Sri Caitanya from worldly motives. It is, of course, not possible for any except the specially fortunate to understand the transcendental activities of the divinity. It is no undue disparagement of the nature of the conditioned soul to declare that he has no chance of understanding the ways of providence by his own puny effort. That which becomes intelligible to the reason of man by its assertive exertions is necessarily limited. We are fatally disposed to be complacently content with such knowledge as comes to us in the shape of our so-called acquisitions. But they are not the whole truth. That which is limited, that is to say exceeded or contained by the limited reason of man, is rejected by his soul as unnecessary and worthless the moment its limited character is clearly demonstrated. So there is a constitutional spiritual hankering for the limitless in our proper selves. This hankering also imperatively demands complete satisfaction. Such satisfaction is declared by all the scriptures to be realizable by the method of submissive acceptance of the grace of the transcendental teacher. We feel no hesitation to submit to the teacher of the limited and are also proud to be the slaves of the laws of nature. But when it is proposed that we should submit to the unlimited or, in other words, be really free, we vehemently object to the process on the ground that we are likely to lose our birthright of freedom by being deprived of the slavery of physical nature. It is this disloyal irrationality that is the only stumbling block in our way and which prevents us, more effectively than we are ever sincerely prepared to admit, from having any access to the actual realm of the Absolute. There are very few persons, indeed, who are not too obsessed by such misconceptions not to misunderstand the logic of the argument set forth above, and fewer persons still who are prepared to act up to it in practice. The people of East Bengal, enlightened by the mercy of Sri Gaur Sundar, adopted the method of congregational chanting of the name of Hari as the true universal method of worshipping Godhead. But no sooner did they accept the form of the pure religion than they were victimized by a regular succession of pseudo-saviors. Even by the time of Thakur Brindavandas there had already arisen quite a large number of these pretenders to sovereignship and they had actually done a good deal of positive harm. One of these degraded wretches in order to gain his livelihood passed himself off as Raghunath, the avatar of Vishnu. Another sinner persuaded the people to sing him as Narayana by giving up the congregational chant of Krishna established by Sri Gaur Sundar. Commenting on the doings of these profane hoary rascals, Thakur Brindavandas notes the height of absurdity of people who are so entirely at the mercy of physical nature that she makes them change their point of view 3 times in course of every day, being able to induce anyone to mistake such robes as themselves as the Supreme Lord. There was one of these devils, a pseudo-Brahmana, in the country of Rar, who wore the mask of a Brahmana but was really a savage cannibal. This particular rascal had the audacity of making the people call him Gopala, the divine cowboy Krishna, for which reason he was nicknamed the Shiala, fox, by the people. Thakur Brindavandas uses very strong language, indeed, in his open condemnation of the practices of both these pretenders to saviorship and their deluded followers. He is specially grieved for the latter, declaring that the wretch who accepts any person as Godhead in lieu of Sri Caitanya is the worst criminal of the two. He then solemnly exhorts all persons to accept as true the facts that Gauranga Sri Hari is the Lord of the infinity of worlds, that all bondage wears off by the mere recollection of his name, that one triumphs over all adverse circumstances if he but recollects even his servants. The praises of the Lord are sung by the whole world. It is imperatively necessary to serve the feet of the Lord after the manner of himself, by discarding the wrong path. The danger from pseudo-saviors is twofold. They, 1. Induce the people to give up the worship of the Lord and, 2. Make their victims serve their own vile selves. The method that was adopted for gaining these ends was outwardly similar to that of Sri Chaitanya Deva. They also prescribed the congregational chanting of the name of Godhead, meaning themselves. Sri Chaitanya is Godhead himself. There is no impropriety in chanting his name. There would be the most fatal dereliction of one's duty if one disbelieves the divinity of Sri Chaitanya. The only duty of all his followers is to proclaim this truth to all the world in the clearest possible manner so that no one may suffer by missing the excellent opportunity of serving the Supreme Lord in the only feasible way in this controversial age which is devoid of natural faith. Those people who do not believe in the divinity of Sri Chaitanya are alone unfortunate, as they are prevented from adopting the only method of attaining the transcendental service of Godhead. This is the sad lot of the skeptics. There is, however, a lot that is even worse than that of the skeptics, viz., that which befalls the disloyal overcredulous. They allow themselves to be misled by the sufficiently transparent artifices of audacious rascals who know very well how to exploit their weakness. The true course lies midway between these extremes. The conduct and speech of the followers of Sri Chaitanya are, indeed, liable to be misunderstood by the hypocrites and their victims in opposite ways. The atheistic credulous are apt to be misled by rascals who pass themselves off as Godhead for their utter want of faith in Sri Chaitanya. The faith in Sri Chaitanya is to be attained by avoiding the defect of disloyal credulity on the one hand and of scoffing incredulity on the other. It is, therefore, necessary to be cautiously but fully open to real enlightenment. But the case of those unfortunate people who are over-credulous on principle is the most deplorable of all, inasmuch as they are sure to fall into the clutches of those hypocritical rascals whose business it is to lead all those who deliberately seek the untruth still further away from the truth. The only way of avoiding this danger is not to court it by neglecting the proper exercise of one's natural sense of right and wrong and by not following in all sincerity what really appears to be the right path even to our present imperfect judgment. The only right conduct, which also should spontaneously suggest itself to all persons so conducting themselves, is the cultivation of exclusive association with those who actually led the spiritual life by avoidance of all unspiritual company. By such conduct the innate tendency for the service of the truth is strengthened and the chance of benefiting by the instructions of the bona fide sadhus, who come to every seeker of their own accord, is decisively increased. But it is not till one has the opportunity of the right kind of personal association with sadhus that he has any substantive chance of spiritual enlightenment, i.e., of realizing his natural faith in the actual existence of personal Godhead. One who seeks to undergo the necessary training for being fitted for the spiritual service of the Supreme Lord can obtain real and effective help in this age from no one else except Sri Chaitanya. But it is reserved only for those who are sincere seekers of the absolute truth to realize this. One may be very dull or very intelligent, as the world goes. Such dullness and cleverness will equally help or retard one's progress on the spiritual path according as he is sincerely disposed to serve. The theory of good conduct is related to substantive good conduct itself, as shadow to substance. The substance necessarily includes the shadow, but not vice versa. Right conduct is the practice of substantive sincerity. Those who are disposed to undervalue actual conduct regarding it as external are liable to overlook this all-important consideration. External conduct can alone feed the inner enlightenment by the process of concrete actual growing experience of the reality. The experience of the service of the Lord resulting from conduct possesses far greater enlightening power than the experience of worldly affairs, inasmuch as on the spiritual plane conduct and theory are really identical. A dull person who sincerely acts under the direction of a sadhu attains the spiritual vision in much the same time that is taken by an intelligent person who is equally sincere. Worldly dullness does not stand in the way of obtaining the service of the Godhead, provided there is no deliberate insincerity. The dull person is never made intelligent in the worldly sense by his spiritual enlightenment. He still appears to be very dull to worldly people who are devoid of all true intelligence and incapable of understanding the perfectly cognizant spiritual conduct of the bona fide servant of the Lord. That which appears to be wrong or right to the stultified conscience of the conditioned soul is undoubtedly true for the time being, although the hollow and ephemeral nature of empiric ethical conduct must be patent to everyone who feels the slightest inclination for the ethical principle. Spiritual conduct is not mechanically attained either by practicing or by discarding the empiric ethical conduct. In the conditioned state, ethical conduct with the necessary safeguards should be undoubtedly obligatory, and one who may be wantonly disposed to disregard the rules of morality should be regarded as a real menace not only to social but also to spiritual well-being, and such conduct should be punished by all means. This will also automatically prevent the exploitation of the unthinking masses by the otherwise formidable gang of the pseudo-religionists. It is absolutely necessary to try resolutely to avoid this last-mentioned danger. But one should at the same time be careful not to fall into the blunder of supposing that empiric morality is the absolute principle, or that social or domestic well-being is the summum bonum of human life. If the standpoint from which the moralist regards life be incapable of affording us a view of the truth, in spite of any passing conveniences that may seem to result from its adoption, it should be the bounden duty of the human reason to seek for further enlightenment. Such an attempt may, indeed, show our want of absolute faith in the conclusions of empiric morality, but it is not antagonistic to the empiric moral principle. On the contrary, it marks the stage of distinct ethical progress, embodying as it does the conviction that speculative morality does not take us far enough towards the attainment of the goal vaguely proposed by such morality. Spiritual conduct, indeed, must not be imagined as identical with the empiric moral conduct, nor as its derivative. By the cultivation of so-called moral living, the spiritual life is not positively realizable. Moral life is the imaginary ultima thule of the advocates of so-called worldly well-being. The vision of the empiric moralists cannot pass the bounding line of the horizon of this world. The principles of empiric morality have a limited and temporary value. They are rehabilitated, not supplemented by the laws of spiritual living. One who is truly anxious for spiritual enlightenment must, therefore, be prepared also for a thorough readjustment of his moral conduct, both as regards its external manifestation and internal attitude. This change will not coincide with the requirements of the really irrational form of living striven for by the worldly-minded ethical person, and may even be found fault with by those who are thoughtless enough to imagine the correlative worldly principle to be the obligatory rule of human conduct. Such opposition is beside the point and has always to be reckoned with by all sincere seekers of the service of the absolute truth. It has its value for the negative well-being of the world in forcing the spiritual novice to explain his purpose to his opponents in an intelligible form, thus helping the diffusion of the knowledge of the truth and preventing hasty adoption of untruth that is found to parade in the garb of truth in this world. But one may also commit the no less fatal blunder of waiting too long to embrace the truth when he actually presents himself by pretending to be cautious. If this is hypocrisy or idleness, as is often the case, such a procedure will not help one progress towards the truth. It is necessary to be sincerely prepared to firmly discard all untruth and to accept actively the truth at all time in proportion to our real convictions. One who does not do so is still the unreclaimed egotist who has not yet to acquire the salutary ambition for seeking to become an humble and active servant of the absolute truth. A seeker of the active service of the truth should also be prepared to commit an infinity of mistakes in his honest endeavor to find him. Indifference and idleness are the masked forms of hostility to the principle of spiritual service and have to be most carefully avoided by all who are truly desirous of attaining the service of the truth. The Lord stayed for 2 months in East Bengal, moving about in different directions, always taking a particular interest in visiting the river Padmavati. There was a great resuscitation of sound erudition by his scholastic exertions. Hundreds of persons returned to their homes, gaining their diploma by a brief course of study under the Lord. Such is the wonderful power of Sri Caitanya. The whole of East Bengal rushed to the feet of Nimai Pandit for the acquisition of learning. Thousands of persons in this manner became the disciples of the Lord, and it is impossible to ascertain the number of those who obtained the blessing of his teaching. Meanwhile, at Nabadwap, Lakshmi Devi was very much distressed in her heart by separation from her Lord. She did not divulge her condition to anyone. She constantly served the mother. She tasted no food since the departure of the Lord, but only made a show of accepting food as a mere formality. She was stricken at heart with the deepest grief by separation from her Lord. She wept all through the nights by herself. Sri Lakshmi Devi got no respite from her great anxiety even for a moment. She at last felt the separation to be wholly unbearable and wished to make her way to the presence of her Lord. Thereupon, leaving behind in this world a body resembling her own transcendental form, Lakshmi Devi silently betook herself to the side of her husband, eluding the notice of everybody. Holding closely to her heart the lotus feet of the Lord, Lakshmi Devi thus found her way to the bank of the holy Ganges in the state of beatific contemplation. Thakur Brindavandis has refrained from describing the grief of Sri Sachi Devi at the disappearance of Lakshmi, remarking that the cries of the mother melted even hearts of wood. The neighbors were very much pained by hearing of the departure of Sri Lakshmi Devi and turned up to do their customary duties by the departed. The term used in the Shastras to denote the consort of Godhead is Shakti, which may be rendered as power. Godhead is the possessor or Lord of all powers. The power of the Supreme Lord wears a twofold aspect and serves him in apparently opposite ways. There is in the first place the spiritual aspect. This is the enlightening aspect of the divine power, and it is this aspect that is directly obeyed by all bona fide servants of the Lord. There is also the deluding, material or limiting aspect. This aspect is of the nature of the shadow of the spiritual aspect, and as such manifests herself at the opposite pole as the negative and subordinate form of the spiritual aspect. This second aspect is called in the Shastras Maya Shakti, or the limb-lighting power, while the spiritual aspect is called Chit Shakti or cognitive power. The two are not really separate, as the material aspect is correlative and wholly under the control of the spiritual power. The bona fide servants of the Supreme Lord are not under the necessity of obeying his material or limiting power. Sri Lakshmi Devi is the plenary aspect of the spiritual power of the Lord. The relation of the spiritual power to the Supreme Lord, who bears the name of Sri Krishna, is one of indivisibility. Sri Krishna as the Lord of his Chit Shakti is the possessor and controller of power by means of the divine will, while Sri Lakshmi Devi, the spiritual power of the Lord, is the executrix of the divine will. Between the divine will and the agency of his execution there is no difference of category, the one automatically and fully implying the other. Sri Lakshmi Devi is the plenary power of Sri Krishna, representing the will of her Lord and carrying out the same in regard to the secondary powers. Maya, or the material power, is the negative, deluding face of the spiritual power for the performance of a subordinate function that is secondary of correcting the paltry perversity of dissociated souls, and for this reason being necessarily superfluous in the spiritual realm. The material power is comparable in her action to the operation of a piece of cloud on the broad bosom of the spotless sky, preventing the conditioned souls of this phenomenal world from obtaining a view of the great sun Sri Krishna. The cloud devised by Maya is a very, very small part of the cosmic arrangement, serving the spiritual power in a negative capacity for the sustenance of disloyal souls and correcting their perversity by providing the congenial scope for its indulgence. Maya has to employ deception in order to correct, without resorting to any violence, the perversity of the dissociated soul due to the abuse of his freedom to choose his own course. But this necessity to deceive has no place in the economy of the spiritual universe. We are in this place concerned with the question of the intervention of the spiritual power in the benighted sphere under the penal jurisdiction of Maya. This is the descent, avatara, of Sri Krishna into this world. For this purpose the Lord employs the smallest fraction of his spiritual power, or sends down those infinity of plenary divine forms of his own who serve in diverse ways the various purposes of his endless activities, or he himself comes down into this world. Sri Lakshmi Devi, the eternal consort of the Lord, executes all these purposes of the Lord through every degree and variety of her coordinate manifestation. She is identical with the divine activity. But the principle which constitutes the bond between Sri Lakshmi Devi and the Supreme Lord is not one of mechanical submission and domination. It is not at all like the relationship that exists in this phenomenal world between material power and its deluded possessor or slave. Neither is it the so-called rational submission which is conceivable by the perverted reason of the conditional soul. The principle is expressed in the Shastras by the term prema, ordinarily rendered into the English word love, although the word love does not possess the spiritual significance of prema. Prema, or spiritual love, may be defined as the principle of conduct that aims exclusively and causelessly at the gratification of the spiritual senses of Krishna. Unspiritual love, karma, is defined as the principle that aims at the gratification of the material senses of non-Krishna, i.e., of the agent himself. Divine personality, as conceived by the conditioned soul, is a profanation. The worldly notion of personality is radically unwholesome, being made of material stuff. It is not possible for the conditioned soul to conceive of personality except in terms of a physical body bound to a sensuous mind delighting in its inextricable union with the former. This gross conception of personality also finds its way into the empiric attempt to conceive a personal godhead. The unwillingness on the part of empiricists to recognize the divine personality is due to their apprehension of the inevitable presence of grossness in the personal conception itself. They naturally hesitate to extend to the supreme entity who is declared by the scriptures and the innate senses of all humanity to be free from the least taint of unwholesomeness, the degrading notion of personality that is conceivable to the reason of the conditioned soul. But there would be no ground for such hesitation if the divine personality were found to be really such as to make him not only altogether free from our actual gross experience of personality of this world, but in perfect keeping with the highest requirements of our unbiased reason, which can never be really satisfied with its hypothetical concoctions, and also with the declarations of the scriptures. The conditioned soul posing as a person is possessed of two conjoined sets of apparatus called indiscriminately in the English language by the same word, viz. Senses. The internal, cognitive sense principle operates on the external world in the conditioned state by an external process of physical perception through the medium of the physical sense organs, directed and supplemented by the reaction of the material mind, which educes the subtle entities of precepts and concepts from the gross impressions of external objects supplied initially by the physical organs. The personality of the conditioned soul is empirically supposed to consist definitely and concretely of the enveloping material principles and processes of the mind and the physical sense organs directed to the objects of phenomenal nature and tending to material gratification, realizable in terms of the same by the inner conscious principle, which remains otherwise passive. The unwholesome element of such personality consists in its material sensuousness. The inner conscious principle, by seeking to establish his affinity with the objects of phenomenal nature, is ultimately responsible for the perpetuation of the superimposed unwholesome ego, thus realized as the individual personality, which is condemned by the spiritual pro-personalists and the empiric impersonalists alike. Philanthropism is the result of the unpardonable and sacrilegious attempt to make an ideal of this pseudo-personality and to thrust it also on the divinity himself. This is not always unaccompanied by a suspicion of the incongruity of such attempt, but the philanthropists fall into this utterly profane error by striving to escape by a natural impulse from the suicidal alternative of the acceptance of the principle of impersonality proposed by the logical school of empiricism. But by confounding the mundane for the divine, they prove to be even worse enemies of theism than the impersonalists. The tragedy of the profession of the spiritual nature, the mundane personality, is due to the incongruous association of soul with matter in the state of bondage. The conditioned soul deliberately seeks sensuous gratification, which is foreign to his own spiritual nature, by making the world serve the pleasures of the senses. The principle on which he is made to set to work in such a process is supplied by his deluded assumption that he is proprietor or enjoyer of this material world. But the role which is thus attempted is one that is foreign to the real nature of the jiva soul. This proposed proprietorship means the domination of the infinitesimally little over the infinitely great. Such a process can by its nature be only delusive and disappointing. If the tiny soul allows himself to be dominated by the Supreme Soul, he suffers from no such self-elected difficulty. The Supreme Soul can find the employment for the tiny soul that relieves the latter from the necessity of seeking the impossible and natural paltry satisfaction of the gross physical senses. In the perfectly pure rational existence, the subordination of the really little to the really great is realized as being necessarily natural and congenial. It is the unnatural domination of the non-rational and the non-great that demoralizes the soul in the conditioned state. The only cure of the aberrations of this frail so-called mundane personality is, therefore, supplied by the arrangement of the positive spiritual service of the Supreme Soul by the little souls, not mechanically as proposed by the smartest, for the purpose of the gratification of the physical senses, nor impersonally, which tantamounts to self-destruction, but for the infinitely higher purpose of seeking the gratification of the spiritual senses of the Supreme Person, who is the necessarily absolute proprietor of everything. The supreme dominating person can be served positively and consciously by reciprocal dominated personalities and only negatively and unconsciously by impersonal entities. Hence the real reciprocal spiritual personality of his willing servants or powers is proved. The relation of the individual soul to the Supreme Soul is not identical with, but the reciprocal of the relationship of the Supreme Soul to the Jiva. Sri Lakshmi Devi seeks the gratification of the senses of Sri Krishna by an infinite number of complementary little personalities of various dimensions and specifications acting in perfect harmony for ministering to the pleasure of the perfect senses of Sri Krishna. The personality of Sri Lakshmi Devi is not one of enjoyer but of provider of the enjoyment of Sri Krishna, and she serves only the pleasure of Krishna. This reciprocal function in its twofold aspect is prema or spiritual love. So when the Supreme Lord intervenes personally in the affairs of this mundane world for the deliverance of conditioned souls, Sri Lakshmi Devi ever accompanies him and carries out the wishes of her Lord towards the Jiva souls. This is the real background of the picture drawn by Thakur Brindavandas. But the role that Sri Lakshmi Devi has to play as the consort of the ideal householder devotee during his sojourn, by command of the Lord, in this material world, is only one aspect of her divine function as the eternal consort of her supreme husband in the realm of the Absolute. She is the servant of the Lord. She has to minister to the pleasure of the Supreme Lord under the direction of himself as servant in the role of householder. She must not, therefore, regard her husband as identical with the Supreme Lord in his nature of absolute proprietor. She must not suppose that her husband stands in need of, or has any inclination for, enjoyment of any kind for himself. Her function as the consort of the devotee corresponds to that of her husband, both acting the part of associated servants of the Supreme Lord in their roles of husband and wife of each other, in order to teach the deluded wives and husbands of this world their proper relationship to one another in conformity with their absolute loyalty to Krishna. Her pang of separation is, therefore, inexplicable on the supposition that Sri Lakshmi Devi actually experienced the discomforts of a mortal wife placed in a similar circumstance. Although her conduct seems to be due to such motive, her disappearance from this world, which is ascribed to the intensity of her sorrow, also calls for a little explanation to prevent any gross misunderstanding. Sri Lakshmi Devi was engaged in tending Sri Sachi Devi by command of Sri Gaur Sundar during his tour of East Bengal. By refusing to take food and drink and forming the resolution of deliberately starving herself to death. To put an end to her own grief, she might be supposed to have been apparently neglecting the duty assigned to her by her husband. To this the conduct of Sri Vishnupriya Devi, after renunciation of the Lord and also subsequently to his disappearance from this world, would seem to be a great contrast. The duty of a faithful wife whose husband is abroad, as laid down in the Shastras, is to eschew all comforts for herself and keep her mind perpetually fixed on her absent husband. By this means she would be enabled to retain and augment the constancy and intensity of her love for her husband. A wife may be faithful to her husband either quite causelessly out of pure love or from a sense of duty, or for her own selfish happiness. The wife, who loves her husband causelessly, is supposed to be the ideal wife, while one, who minds her own advantage in caring for her husband, is rewarded as a hypocrite. But none of these have any reference to the service of the Supreme Lord. If the husband himself be a servant of Vishnu, it is only then that the conduct of the wife, who seeks to assist him in such service, necessarily also attains the level of service of the divinity. In this case, any love, duty or indifference, shown to the husband personally without any conscious realization of his function as servant of the Lord, would also seem at first sight to fall short of the full service of Krishna. This brings us really to the dangerous ground. It is, of course, possible for his wife to be carnally attached to a Vaishnava husband. If it be so, what will be the consequence of such attachment? A Vaishnava by his very nature can never be a participator in the carnality of his wife. There can, therefore, be no chance of reciprocal carnality in such a case, as the wife would receive no encouragement to follow her suicidal course. There would then remain the chance of her own regeneration if her attachment to the Vaishnava husband, although due to carnal motive, induces her to serve him faithfully through all apparent neglect on his part. This will tend to establish that real contact between the two which will be undoubtedly beneficial for both if the husband continues true to the Lord. Even if in such a case the wife be not enabled to attain to the conscious service of the Lord, she would unconsciously take a long stride in the direction of such service. If, therefore, the husband be a true Vaishnava, a path is opened thereby even to a carnally disposed wife to attain to the spiritual condition by serving him in a friendly way. Any service rendered to a Vaishnava from any kind of friendly motive is rewarded by the attainment of the summum bonum. On the other hand, the only conduct that is really obstructive of the spiritual well-being of any person is that inspired by disinclination to serve the Vaishnavas or a positive inclination to oppose or vilify them. The spiritual service of Krishna offers unfettered freedom of choice to everybody as regards the form in which it is to be rendered. The only thing needed is absence of conscious aversion to the Lord or to his servants, and especially the latter. Any aversion shown to the servants of the Lord is fatal for the same reason that makes any form of friendly attachment to him a means of assured safety. There is no other way for the deliverance of conditioned souls except by serving the servants of the Lord, who appear in our midst and who by command of the Lord graciously accept any and every form of service for the well-being of all sinners without exception. Therefore, judged from the point of view of the wife of the ideal householder devotee, the conduct of Sri Lakshmi Devi is self-protected against all adverse criticism for the reason that it happened to be of the nature of an intense friendly attachment for the servant of the Lord. Her role was, therefore, exactly in keeping with the purpose of the Lord himself and vital for clearing up most serious misconceptions on the subject of one's duty by a Vaishnava. The departure of Sri Lakshmi Devi to her own realm of Vaikuntha did not in any way obstruct the activities of the Lord. The loyal wife of the most rabid worldling can desire for no more pleasant exit from this world than was exhibited by Sri Lakshmi Devi without any of the unwholesome factors that are necessarily associated with the departure of the sinner. But as a matter of fact, the mode of disappearance from this world of the Supreme Lord and his eternal consorts, servitors and paraphernalia is altogether different from the death of a mortal. The art of the magician furnishes the nearest parallel of the divine activity. The magical performs the feat of dying in his own person to the view of the spectators without really dying at all. Sri Lakshmi Devi deluded the people into believing that they witnessed her death to the detail of cremating her supposed dead body, independently of any change to herself. The creation of an actual physical body was not necessary, as the eternal consort of the Lord is the mistress of physical nature and performs all her spiritual acts, even in this world, without any positive help of the deluding material energy, who is her own subservient shadow. But the grief of Sri Lakshmi Devi, which was the cause of her departure, was not a pretense. The Lord has the power of making himself invisible even to Sri Lakshmi Devi herself. The grief of Sri Lakshmi Devi is, however, not like the grief of conditioned souls who are pained by being deprived of their opportunity of selfish enjoyment. Sri Lakshmi Devi is the eternally inseparable consort of the Supreme Lord, but is nevertheless not identical with him. It is this which makes possible their relationship of love in union and separation. She has her existence in the divine function of causeless loving service of the Supreme Lord. She serves the Lord equally both in union and separation. So there is no decrease of love or bliss, but only a change of the form of service when Sri Lakshmi Devi displays the extreme grief of separation from her only Lord. Chapters of Tapan Misra. Returned from East Bengal. After staying for a while in East Bengal, the Lord made up his mind to return home. On being apprised of the intention of the Lord, the people of those parts brought various offerings of all their treasure. The presents included gold, silver, pots for holding water, excellent seats, finely dyed blankets, a great variety of clothing, etc. All persons gladly made an offering of all the best things of their households. Lord Gauranga Sri Hari was pleased to accept their offerings, bestowing his merciful glance on all. Having taken his leave of all persons, Lord Sri Gauranga set out for his own home. Many students from East Bengal followed the Lord to Nabadwip to study under him there. The Lord apparently did not think it to be incompatible with the duty of a householder to accept the presence of the people of East Bengal for imparting them knowledge of the Shastras. This may be objected to on the ground that it amounts to nothing less than the selling of knowledge which is forbidden by the Shastras. There is a distinction between professional teachers of different branches of secular knowledge and the preacher of the religion. The profession of a secular teacher is recommended by the Shastras as unobjectionable from the worldly point of view and is given preference over other occupations for earning a livelihood. The Lord does not appear in East Bengal as preacher of the religion. The Shastras forbid selling of religious teaching. The preacher of religion must not accept any remuneration for his services as preacher. If he accepts payment and is dependent on it for his livelihood, he cannot but desire to please his paymasters and thus fail to maintain his unconditional adherence to the truth, which is essential in every bona fide preacher of the religion. The least concession to any worldly purpose makes a person unfit for being a preacher of the absolute truth. It is, therefore, absolutely necessary to keep the whole arrangement for the preaching of religion outside the obligations of the social systems devised for the attainment of purely worldly ends, as any adulteration is bound to be productive of irreparable mischief for all concerned. There is no harm in anyone accepting presents in return for imparting knowledge of the Shastras to his students. These payments also were voluntary and not confined to the students. It was apparently regarded as the duty of all householders to place the best part of their wealth at the disposal of the secular teachers of the people. This was a social arrangement for the promotion of secular learning. It had nothing to do with the preaching of the religion. The people naturally flocked to Nimai Pandit in order to study Krsna, as he was reputed to be the greatest scholar of that day. They had their reward in gaining scholarship of a superior order in a short time. There was, however, one notable exception. A most fortunate Brahmana, by name Tapan Misra, presented himself before the Lord on the eve of his return from East Bengal, with the intention of obtaining a solution of his doubts regarding the real nature of the object and method of spiritual practices. Tapan Misra was not one of the ordinary type of inquirers who believe it to be their duty to be curious about everything and therefore also about religion. The problem, with which Tapan Misra approached the Lord, had been suggested in course of a long endeavor to find the truth by the method of sincerely following out the injunctions of the Shastras. Tapan Misra had already lost all taste for worldly life. He was in that critical state when the mode of life, with which he had been familiar, had ceased to interest, but when yet no satisfactory substitute had been found. Being naturally of a perfectly sincere turn of mind, he had not sat down tightly on his doubts. He had been to all persons whom he considered likely to be able to help him in solving his doubts. These doubts were troubling him in spite of the conventional religious life with its theory and practices which, as the duty of one born in a Brahmana family, he had duly inherited and which he had been trying sincerely to follow up in life. He was too genuinely inquisitive to be content without troubling about the real value of his inherited activities and their necessity for himself as an individual. He was, therefore, deeply pious in his external conduct but distracted within by the gravest doubts regarding his own real condition. This is a very rare combination. Habit is a formidable enemy on the path of progress if it happens to be unduly enamored of itself and breeds the inclination to be really content with a bad thing. The human soul by his constitution is naturally opposed to anything short of the absolute truth. No mechanical dogmatism can satisfy him. The affairs of this world are carried on by most of us on the basis of working hypotheses called by the misleading designations of natural laws and moral principles. Their proper function is merely to stimulate, without being able to satisfy, our loyal inclination for the service of truth. Those who suppose that it is never possible for us to attain the real, immutable truth, soon get reconciled to this ever-shifting hypothetical mode of living which alone is possible with the help of empiric ethics and the other empiric sciences. They are not pessimists as regards their own method. They subsist on the hope of a hypothetical notion called progressive improvement, without really caring to examine seriously the basis of such hope. Tapan Misra had ceased to be a contented empiricist. He had also failed to understand the basis of his own faith in the scriptures. A careful study of the Shastras and prolonged performance of Shastric practices had failed to solve his doubts. He was studious, thoughtful and practical and had also been trying honestly to live the unworldly life enjoined by the Shastras. As the result of this he had made the discovery that it was not possible to understand or obey the Shastras, as their theories and injunctions seemed to contradict one another and certain principles also seemed wholly impossible to carry out in practice. He was too honest to be disposed to ignore or lightly explain away such discrepancies. In one word, he was a seeker of the absolute truth and determined not to serve anything else under the name of the truth. In this dilemma Tapan Misra had a wonderful dream. A celestial being appeared to him in his dream and advised him to proceed to Nimai Pandit who would solve all his doubts. The god told him further that Nimai Pandit is no other than Narayana himself who had appeared in this world in his human form for delivering the conditioned souls. The Brahmana was also warned not to divulge this secret of the Vedas to anyone else as such conduct would entail trouble for him in all subsequent lives. The Brahmana shed copious tears on beholding this auspicious dream. Recovering his balance of judgment, he blessed his good fortune and, fixing his thoughts on the Lord, hastened to his presence. Tapan Misra made his way to the place where the Lord was seated in the midst of his pupils and, after making obeisance, stood before him with the palms of his hands joined in the attitude of supplication. He then completely laid open his heart to the Lord, saying that the ordinary duties of life had lost all their charms for him, and that he was passing his days in a state of intense suspense due to failure to understand the proper method and object of spiritual living. He had, therefore, come to him for enlightenment on the subject, being fully convinced that there was no other way out of the difficulty except through his mercy. He hoped to be delivered from the bondage of the world by his kindness and prayed that he would overlook his unfitness and mercifully communicate to him the right method and object of spiritual living. He desired to learn the truth from his own lips and to be delivered thereby from the state of unbearable misery. The Lord told the Brahmana that he was most fortunate, as there cannot be any fortune higher than the condition of one who is desirous of serving Krishna with all his faculties. The service of Godhead is a subject that is most difficult to understand and is vast beyond all measure. The Supreme Lord himself settles the form of his worship for every age, proclaiming the same for the information of all. For this purpose he comes down into this mundane world in each of the 4 ages. He returns to his realm after settling the form of the religion that is appropriate for each particular age. The account of the Lord's appearances in this world is recorded in the Shastras for the information of everyone. The Lord Krishna himself says in the Gita, "I appear in this world in the successive ages for the purpose of delivering the sadhus, for eliminating those who are addicted to evil and for fully establishing the religion." The Bhagavatam says that Krishna appears in each of the 4 ages with a different complexion. He is white, red and yellow respectively in the 3 other ages and is of a dark hue in Dwapara. The color that Krishna assumes in the different ages corresponds to the character of the particular age. The form of religion, laid down by the Lord for the Kali age, is the congregational chant of the holy name. There are 4 different forms of the religion to be followed by the souls in the different ages. The object of all forms is the same. This common object is realized in the Krita age by following the method of meditation, dhyana, on Vishnu. In the Treta age by worshipping him with sacrifices, Maka. In the Dvapara age by the mode of serving the holy form in the manner of ritualistic worship, Archana, and in this Kali age by chanting, Kirtan, Hari. The performance, Yana, of the chant of the holy name is, therefore, the only mode of the worship for the Kali age. One cannot be delivered in the Iron Age by following any of the other prescribed forms of worship. The Vedas themselves fail to describe fully the praises due to one who takes the holy name night and day, eating or sleeping. It is necessary to note carefully that the modes of asceticism, tapas, and sacrifice, yana, are forbidden in the Kali age. Those who worship Krishna are most fortunate. The Lord advised Tapan Misra to worship Krishna by staying at home, avoiding whatever was opposed to it positively or negatively, by the method of single-hearted devotion. Sri Gaur-Sundar also assured Tapan Misra that he would realize the true nature of the object and mode of worship, and in fact everything, by means of the congregational chant of the name of Hari. The name of Hari alone is efficacious. There is absolutely no other course in the Kali age. The Lord told Misra that the name, or Mahamantra, that should be chanted consists of 16 names and 32 letters possessing the potency of the mantra, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare. He assured Misra that he would know the true object as well as method of spiritual living when by constant practice of chanting the holy name the first tender shoots of spiritual love, prema, would manifest themselves. Misra made repeated prostrated obeisances at the feet of the Lord on learning this teaching from the mouth of the Lord himself. The Misra said that he would like to remain with the Lord, if so commanded. But the Lord asked him to proceed to Varanasi, Benares, without delay, promising to meet him there and to tell him all the principles regarding method and object of spiritual living. This short catechism of the creed laid down by the Supreme Lord as the only form of religion of the present age will give the reader a concrete and definite but not the detailed idea of the form of worship established by Sri Chaitanya Deva. The principles as well as the practice that are taught will become clearer as we follow the career of the Lord and his devotees through each successive chapter. But it is necessary to make a few observations on the subject without anticipating what is to follow in order to clear uncertain initial misconceptions that may trouble the reader in regard to the outline that is just offered. It is definitely declared that the object of religion is one but its form varies from age to age. But the form is not evolved by the course of events of this world. The establishment of the form of worship appropriate for the particular age is also a divine event. This task is performed by the Supreme Lord who comes down in this world for the purpose of establishing and proclaiming the form of the worship to be followed in each age. This is a most important point. Those who object to variety of the form of worship are in the wrong. The variety of form is not evolved by the changing circumstances of this world, although it is of the nature of an adjustment. But the adjustment is not human, nor natural, but divine, which is also made by the Lord himself. By the side of this special form of worship established and proclaimed by the Lord himself as the dispensation of the age, there may and, as a matter of fact do, actually spring up quite a crop of the historical forms devised by the blind speculative instinct of the human mind to find its own independent solution of the problem of the true function of life. The divine dispensation of each age is fully in accordance with the teaching of the whole body of the Shastras and is also definitely and clearly stated therein. This is the really authentic evidence of the divine dispensation for the present age. This special form, though existing potentially in the record of the scriptures, requires to be established and proclaimed by the Lord himself to make it actually available for the age. The significance of neither the form nor the object of divine dispensations may be properly grasped by the conditioned soul unless and until he is inclined of his own accord to seek for the truth by the method of giving up every other mode and object of living when and to the extent the truth actually manifests himself. This is the sine qua non, the only prerequisite, for the spontaneous attainment of spiritual enlightenment. The points that are to be carefully remembered are these. Spiritual truth is categorically and eternally different from all so-called empiric truth. Spiritual truth is eternal and absolute by his nature, whereas empiric truth is always tentative and changeable. The proper relation of the soul to spiritual truth is, therefore, that of unconditional, perfectly rational submission. Whereas the soul has no affinity whatsoever with the so-called empiric truth, which is a material product and towards which the human mind, mimicking the spiritual activity of the soul, pursues the plan of alternative adoption and rejection. It is the process which the mind is always disposed to proclaim as the function of the soul with whom it declares itself to be identical in order to delude the soul into agreeing to its unnatural domination. The mind is the agent of Maya for deluding the soul. Spiritual truth cannot be discovered by the efforts of the materialized mind. The clear perception of this fact is the indispensable prerequisite for experiencing any real desire for the spiritual truth. To such a seeker, say the Shastras, the truth reveals his own form. The duty of the conditioned soul is, therefore, to disavow all connection with empiric truth in theory as well as in practice and to wait upon the pleasure of the spiritual truth for all enlightenment. Spiritual truth, unlike dead material hypotheses, is a living entity possessing the power of the true initiative. Spiritual truth is pleased to show himself to the soul who, on realizing the inevitable futility of the empiric method of quest, is in search of the right method and object of the true rational inquiry. But a person, who is dissatisfied with the limitations and inconclusiveness of the method and object of the empiric search for truth, need not necessarily accept the alternative of waiting upon the pleasure of the divinity, who is identical with the absolute truth, for enlightenment. He may still continue to depend on human contrivance. He may believe in magic, he may believe in blind faith. He may believe in asceticism or yogic practices based on the principle of the efficacy of control over the mind promised by physical processes such as breathing exercises, etc., etc. He may also believe in direct revelation to his heart without the necessity of any extraneous effort on his part. It is always possible to secure a number of texts of the Shastras in apparent support of almost any view that one has already decided to adopt. The dissatisfaction that leads to such futile activities will be of no help in the quest of the truth. The instrumentality of the mind and its speculative faculty need not, of course, be ignored. All that is necessary is to continue to use them vigorously, but with all due allowance for their limitations in every endeavor for the attainment of the unalloyed service of the truth. When the absolute truth makes his appearance to the human soul, the cognitive faculty has to be actively employed in his service if the truth is to be realized. But our cognitive faculty must not be allowed to obstruct or to dominate the absolute truth. Our cognitive faculty must submit to be enlightened, not passively after the manner of stocks and stones, but by the full exercise of its active receptive function which is natural and possible for all self-conscious entities. The defect of the empiric method consists in overestimating the scope and power of the self-conscious principle in the conditioned soul. The self-conscious principle itself should not project itself in the material world by willfully disconnecting itself from the source of 11 real self-consciousness. Such wrong relationship with matter is punished by the increasing curtailment of the scope of activity of the conscious principle itself. Relationship of the soul with matter is possible and desirable, but without losing connection with the very source of self-consciousness. The purpose of spiritual endeavor is to revive in an active form the dormant connection with the source. But the mind is to be directed to the source of its consciousness by the active exercise of all its faculties for the purpose. The existence of a recognizable and accessible source of the pure, unobscured conscious principle is the initial necessity if any theory of the absolute has to be translated into practice. This is supplied by the periodic appearance of the Supreme Lord in this world. The Shastras are his harbingers. The idea that religion is identical with dogma in the empiric sense is due to fundamental misconception of the nature of the function of the soul in his purely spiritual state. Submission to a half-conviction or unconviction is dogma in the real sense, which is the very life of our ordinary worldly activity in all its forms. The almost unctuous fear of all dogma that is so much affected by all empiricists should appear to all consistent thinkers to be a piece of brazen hypocrisy. It is like the inveterate and designing thief warning honest people against the crime of theft in order to disarm all suspicions regarding the real thief, who is no other than himself. The Shastras alone are not dogmatic, but are wholly opposed to and free from all taint of irrational empiric dogmas, open and disguised. The Shastras, indeed, expose the futility and inconsistency of dogmatism to the chagrin of all hypocritical empiric professors and disseminators of rank dogmatism under the name of rationality. This is the destructive function of the Shastras. Their constructive function is to supply the clue to the absolute truth. But the Shastras are not themselves sufficient for the purpose of effecting the deliverance of conditioned souls, as the latter are on principle disinclined to give them an unprejudiced, complete and patient hearing. The few, who are exceptions to this rule, are bound to attain the truth if after carefully studying the Shastras they do not misunderstand, or imperfectly understand, or fail to act up to the method laid down in the Shastras in a perfectly convincing and cognizable manner for the quest of the absolute truth. Tapan Misra could understand neither the method nor the object of spiritual endeavor as laid down in the Shastras. He had been confused by his own honest endeavor. The methods that he had followed had actually failed, and he was also aware of this fact, to yield the result promised by the Shastras. It is, no doubt, impossible to fully understand how the instructions of Nimai Pandit recorded above could produce in such a critically minded, sincere soul complete and instantaneous faith in all the statements of the Lord. The dogmatic empiricists will object to this on the ground that it is dogmatism to which he professes to be opposed in theory. But without further wasting our time on these shameless hypocrites, whose folly has already been sufficiently exposed, it would be far better to try to understand how Nimai Pandit himself was free from all such hypocritical dogmatism. What Nimai Pandit said is this: Tapan Misra should constantly repeat the Maha Mantra. The Maha Mantra consists of 16 names and 32 letters of the alphabet. The Maha Mantra, although it is technically in the form of name and not of mantra, yet possesses all the potency of the mantra. The names in the case of address in their Sanskrit form, constituting the Maha Mantra, have the following order: Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Rama, 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 Hare. This Maha Mantra is to be constantly recited. There is no condition. The real meaning of the method and object of spiritual endeavor, laid down in the Shastras, would appear spontaneously after the process had been followed to the point when the first tender shoots of spiritual love for the divinity made their appearance. This is a very simple creed which also does not apparently rest on the rational basis. A string of names is to be uttered continuously. How could this apparently non-rational advice fully satisfy Tapan Misra? The whole answer in a nutshell is this: it is so because Tapan Misra submitted to receive the truth from the Supreme Lord. The substantive truth is communicated by the power of mercy of the Lord. He cannot be reached by the uphill effort of the empiric mind. It is no doubt true that Sri Chaitanya Deva subsequently described to this same Tapan Misra in greater detail this very subject. That discourse is all important and will appear in this work in its proper place. It will suffice for the present to observe that the process recommended is different from the magical art. The result promised is the knowledge of the right method and object of spiritual endeavor discussed in the pages of the vast literature of the Shastras. Magic produces and promises to produce a temporary delusion. Even when magic seems to produce a comparatively lasting result, it is also not spiritual in the rational sense of the philosophers. The cure of a disease of the seeming increase of the scope or power of the senses and the mind, in regard to their relation with the objects of this phenomenal world limited by the conditions of time and space, are not spiritual results according to any school. Those who are inattentive to the distinction between the real truth and changing hypotheses, between the spiritual and the material, are likely to confound the Maha Mantra with a magical formula. It is necessary to avoid this possible misconception. All that can be reasonably urged at this stage is that the proposition is stated but is not supported by any form of argument or elucidation. The answer is that the discussion is deliberately postponed to enable the narrative to develop to that point at which it will be practicable to resume the further consideration of the subject in this form. Meanwhile, the conversation of Nimai Pandit with Tapan Misra and its effect on the latter may be accepted as a most wonderful event which actually took place but which does not explain itself. Of course, nothing is impossible with the Lord. The empiric dogmatist is not, however, satisfied, or professed to be dissatisfied, unless an effort is made to consider all subjects from the point of view of our limited reason, which is confessedly unfit to find out the real truth. Such inconclusive discussions by the method of begging the question to be proved also pretend to carry our knowledge of the subjects so discussed further in the direction of the truth. Such discussions undoubtedly serve to direct our attention to all the superficial and misleading aspects of a subject. We gather much information by its means, which is of a negative character and falls within the limited scope permitted to our present mental faculties. Such knowledge is applicable to our circumstances of the phenomenal world and enables us to a more or less extent to obtain the fulfillment of our worldly purposes. This is the principle of worldly utility. It need neither be belittled nor ignored. It is effective in its way, but the attainment of a worldly result is no help in the process of understanding the absolute, i.e., the spiritual or real and abiding nature of those very phenomena. For that purpose they require to be looked at from the point of view of the absolute truth. The Lord alone can communicate the spiritual understanding which enables us to know the absolute truth. Once we have been enabled to attain the absolute standpoint, we are in a position to really share in the discourse about the absolute truth, which is the subject matter of the Shastras. The Lord may adopt any method to communicate to us this spiritual enlightenment. There is nothing surprising in regard to the activities of the Lord. But at the same time, the Lord does nothing that is not also perfectly rational in the only true sense. We are, therefore, justified in trying to find out not the empiric but the absolute rationale of the Lord's teachings. We shall revert to this subject in its proper place. Tapan Misra was, however, convinced that he had at last found out the truth of whom he was in search. He made repeated prostrated obeisances to the Lord, who now directed him to proceed to Benares without delay, where the Lord promised to meet him again and impart the knowledge regarding the detailed principles of the method and object of worship. The reader is now in a position to distinguish between the connected processes of the exposition of the principles of spiritual endeavor and imparting of spiritual enlightenment. Misra was not advised to repeat the Mahamantra mechanically. Such a piece of advice gratis could not have satisfied a real inquirer like Tapan Misra. He was satisfied because he was enlightened by the grace of the Lord as regards the substantive existence of the subjects of his inquiry. Such causeless occurrences ordinarily go by the names of miracle and magic. But we should be careful to remember that the performances of the Lord are not miraculous in the sense of being unintelligible, nor magical in the sense of being delusive. They are spiritual, that is intelligible to the perfect judgment of the enlightened soul, although wholly incomprehensible to the limited reason of the soul with a predilection for the bound state. There is, of course, no question of delusion. Tapan Misra was spiritually enlightened by the grace of the Lord. Or, in other words, the perfect judgment of the emancipated soul was re-established in him. He was, therefore, in the position to understand the reality of the teaching of the Lord. The emancipated soul functions in a strictly subordinate capacity. Such a soul does not try to know anything by his own ascending effort. He simply waits to be enlightened. This may appear to be like total loss of initiative, but it is really the attainment of the true initiative. The enlightened soul is able to distinguish between the results obtainable by the process of the so-called initiative possible for the intellect that seeks its own gratification and the corresponding faculty of the free soul willingly seeking the gratification of Krsna. The initiative exists in both cases, but the power is abused in one case and used properly in the other. It is necessary to lead a healthy life. It is also necessary to understand the principles of the medical science for the purpose of being enabled to preserve one's health. It is meaningless to want to understand the principles for any other purpose. It is the only function of the free soul to serve the truth. But the absolute truth is not a general formula, still less an abstraction. The absolute truth is a real person with perfect initiative and perfect will. The so-called abstract truth, being a figment of our defective imagination, is really a dead thing which cannot be our master. The absolute truth, because he happens to be the real person with will of his own who is not identical with our wills, can really command and be really obeyed. The only function of the pure soul is to obey the highest person. It is possible to suppose that we realize the nature of the spiritual service when it is presented to us in the form of an abstract discussion like the present one. But the conditioned soul can never realize the nature of spiritual service merely by the process of such discussion, because he has as yet no substantive experience of the spiritual existence. The truth cannot be experienced by the material senses or the materialized mind. He can only be experienced by the spiritual senses and the spiritual mind. Tapan Misra found his spiritual senses and his spiritual mind by the grace of the Lord. This settled his doubts regarding the substantive existence, nature, and object of spiritual endeavor. He was, therefore, no longer in need of the knowledge of the principles of such endeavor. But a discussion of the principles from the lips of the Lord himself was necessary for the negative enlightenment of an emancipated souls. The Lord then embraced Tapan Misra. This produced horripilation all over the frame of the Brahmana due to the manifestation of spiritual ecstatic love that binds all individual jiva souls with the feet of the Lord. The Brahmana, on receiving the favor of the embrace of the Lord of Vaikuntha, then experienced for the first time the real spiritual bliss. At the time of taking his leave he unbosomed to the Lord the details of his dream. On hearing his story the Lord observed that it was true as far as it was proper and reasonable. But he must not tell all this to any other person. The Lord repeated this warning once more with earnestness. He then stood up smiling on the arrival of the auspicious moment of his departure for home. In this manner Lord Gauranga Srihari prepared to return home after glorifying the country of Vanga by his presence on her soil. The Lord reached home in the evening with a great quantity of valuables in the shape of money and costly objects which he had brought as presents from East Bengal. The Lord made prostrated obeisances to the feet of his mother and made over to her all the treasures that he had brought and immediately proceeded with his disciples to the Ganges to bathe in the holy stream. The mother, stricken at heart, without delay busied herself in preparations for cooking his meal with the help of other members of the family. The Lord, teacher of all persons by his own example, prostrated himself in obeisance to the Ganges in many ways. He sported in the water of the Ganges for a while. The Lord returned home after having obtained the sight of the Ganges and bathed in her water. Then after duly performing the daily worship, Lord Gauranga Srihari sat down to his meal. The Lord of Vaikuntha, having dined to satisfaction, seated himself at the doorstep of Vishnu's shrine. By this time all relatives and friends came to accost him and sat on all sides round the Lord. The Lord, talking to all in a smiling and jocular manner, told them how pleasantly he had passed his days in East Bengal. Mimicking the mode of speech of East Bengal, the Lord laughingly caricatured the people of that country. His friends did not say anything about the disappearance of Sri Lakshmi Devi, being aware that such communication would produce sadness. After a short stay all the friends took their leave of him. The Lord sat in the same position continuing to chew the betel, indulging in light talk, laughter and jokes. Sri Sachi Devi was staying away inside the room. She did not come before her son. The Lord himself now went up to his mother and found that her countenance was overcast with an expression of deep dejection. The Lord greeted his mother with sweet words. He inquired about the cause of her grief, complaining that on his return from a distant land, instead of welcoming him with special gladness, she had chosen to wear the appearance of mourning, and pressed to know the reason of her sadness. On hearing these words of her son, the mother burst into tears, holding down her face, and remained speechless in her distress. The Lord told her that he understood everything. Some evil must have befallen her daughter-in-law. At this all who were present informed the Lord that his spouse had indeed obtained the mercy of the holy Ganges. Lord Gauranga Sri Hari, on being told of the departure of Sri Lakshmi Devi, his consort, paused for a brief space, holding down his head. As a confession of grief at separation from his beloved, the life of all the Vedas remained silent for a while. After indulging his grief in this matter for a brief space, in imitation of the ways of the people of this world, the Lord repeated with a patient mind this sloka of the Bhagavatam: who are, indeed, these husbands, sons, and relatives? Whose relations are they? It is all due to ignorant delusion. The Lord continued to speak: Mother, why do you feel sad? How can that which is preordained be cancelled? Such is the march of time. No one belongs to anybody. It is for this reason that the Vedas declare this world to be impermanent. The whole world is under the dominion of the Lord. Who else can bring about either union or severance? Therefore what has happened has been by the will of the Lord. Where is the use of grieving for what is past? Is there anyone who is more fortunate than that departed person of pious deeds who has attained the mercy of the Ganges before the disappearance of her husband? Consoling his mother in this way, the Lord turned his mind to his other duties in the company of his friends and relatives. On hearing these words of nectarine sweetness from the holy lips of the Lord, all persons were fully relieved of every cause of grief. We are accustomed to expect something altogether new and strange and wholly different from everything with which we are now so familiar, on being spiritually enlightened. This accounts for our contempt for the homely and familiar events of our present everyday life. We expect to find the life of saints to be something miraculous and abnormal. This is due to want of clear thinking that leads us to confound the supernatural with the unnatural. We have not to travel through all the vastness of space in order to arrive at Vaikuntha. We fall into this world as soon as our spiritual vision is obscured. The same Vaikuntha is then reflected in a most unwholesome manner in the mirrors of our hearts. All that is necessary in order to get rid of the misery of the worldly bondage is to cleanse the mirror of the heart to enable Vaikuntha to appear to us in the undistorted form. This function few of us consider it worth our while to set about in right earnest. We want to reach Vaikuntha by extending the scope of our wrong activities. But so long as the heart remains unchanged, the prospect does not undergo any material change. The whole question is this: are we seriously desirous of knowing the truth? Are we prepared for a change of heart to accomplish this? This is hastily supposed to imply the call for the abdication of all functions of this world. If wife and children have not to be loved, we are naturally shocked by the requisition. It would be easier to part from them for good, which is happening to soldiers and sailors any day of their lives. But that does not make them spiritual, as we know from experience. It is the humdrum duties of the average householder which hang round our necks like the proverbial millstone and require to be enlivened by the relieving process of separation, heroism, death, calamities, or the like. Without these latter, life would be unbearable. The question on the threshold of the spiritual life is not how to retain or get rid of the activities that we already have in a more effective or striking manner. Such an attitude involves a foregone conclusion. How can a temporary thing be retained effectively? How can an actual thing be got rid of without mangling ourselves? The runaway as well as the preservative methods are alike futile and irrational, but they happen to be the only ones that the resources of our present imagination can suggest for our relief. No third alternative is at present conceivable to us. That a person, who is acting exactly like ourselves in this very world and with whom we ourselves have most intimate relations, should have to be considered as being altogether different in his outlook and behavior from ourselves, is difficult to understand or to admit. All that we may be prepared to allow is that he is different from us in the same way as any two persons are different from one another. The esoteric explanation is not of much use either in understanding or in dealing with any person who is also apparently found to belong to this world in the ordinary sense. If a person calling himself or allowing himself to be called a Vaishnava have to be allotted a privileged position that does not accord with the requirements of our common sense, simply on the basis of such esoteric explanations, there would presently be no necessity for the exercise of common sense at all in any affair of life. These are the two poles of the empiric attitude. It expects either magic or wholesale surrender to the so-called common sense. It professes the latter as being the more workable of the two. What change, if any, it accordingly asks, is proposed to be effected in its attitude by the transcendentalists. Sri Gaur Sundar goes to East Bengal to earn wealth by teaching the people. This is quite intelligible and natural from the common sense point of view. After his return from there he finds that his wife had had a sudden and untimely end. But he is not upset by the information and calmly consoles his stricken mother. This is also quite sensible and nothing extraordinary. It is ordinarily done under similar circumstances by many other persons whose doings are allowed to pass unnoticed, by the ordinary rules of common sense. If there be an esoteric meaning behind all this, which was denied by many of his contemporaries at the time of their occurrence, what difference will it make in our conduct if we refuse to take any notice of the same? We would behave in the same, or sometimes maybe in a better way in similar circumstance by the guidance of our common sense without troubling about any supposed spiritual implication. Life in Vaikuntha resembles life in this world, but it does not interest the people of this world. In Vaikuntha there are far more attractive objects of enjoyment than we find in this world and in an absolutely and fully accessible form. But no one there enjoys or discards them. This is opposed to the so-called common sense of the people of this world. The common sense of this world tells us both to enjoy and to discard. The common sense of Vaikuntha tells one to do neither. The Vaishnavas are endowed with the common sense of Vaikuntha. The esoteric explanation is the only real explanation of their conduct, which is based on a different common sense, in the same way as the esoteric explanation is the only explanation that is ordinarily given of the conduct of the people of this world. If it is asked, do the Vaishnavas want to be guided by the common sense of Vaikuntha, which is claimed to be different from the common sense of this world, in their dealings with the people of this world? The reply is both yes and no. They behave towards one another unambiguously and in accordance with the common sense of Vaikuntha. Towards the people of this world they behave in accordance with the common sense of this world, which is, however, perfectly amenable to the common sense of Vaikuntha. So there need not be any quarrel over the matter on the part of the advocates of common sense in its worldly sense. The only difficulty is that ordinary common sense, being based on the malicious selfish desire for sensuous well-being of oneself, leaves all our problem of existence really unsolved. Nay, it actually aggravates the evil of a perpetual state of joyless discord. Our common sense is sound in essence but misguided in practice by the fell disease of hankering for selfish transitory enjoyment. The little acts of everyday life would be endowed with the perfection of Vaikuntha if only a real change of attitude could be brought about. This is wholly beyond the powers of our mind to conceive, and it is not possible for us to fill in every detail of the scheme of life led in Vaikuntha by means of our poor, corrupt imagination. Every activity of Vaikuntha is productive of more really lasting good and happiness than all the hollow mummeries of the whole range of activities of this accursed world. Sri Gaur Sundar apparently led a most ordinary kind of life as householder. Later he led the ordinary life of a sannyasin. But both were actually lived on the plane of Vaikuntha. The narrative of his life and its apparently ordinary commonplace events acquaint us with the archetype of the actual life led by absolutely pure souls in the realm of Vaikuntha. The esoteric meaning is the real meaning of such a life. The esoteric meaning of the worldly life is a contradiction in terms. But all entities of this world are capable of being used properly if they are employed in the service of the absolute truth. In order to attain that point of view we must try to act up to the common sense of Vaikuntha. If we choose to lead a worldly life we can never obtain a glimpse of that transcendental subject. It is not by digesting or lecturing on the Vedanta philosophy that spiritual enlightenment is attainable. There are unfortunately many clever exponents of the Vedanta in this country and abroad who have done no appreciable good either to themselves or to others by their vanities. The life and teachings of Sri Gaur Sundar are worth most careful perusal because they raise at every step the gravest issues discussed in the Vedanta in their concrete, living form. All exposition of the Vedanta has to conform to the life of Sri Caitanya before it can be accepted as really true. This is the relation between the two. In this case we have to do with the actual reality, while in the case of ordinary worldly pandits we have to deal with the labored nonsense of corrupt humbugs who really know nothing of their subject. The mere mechanical perusal of the genuine account of the life of Sri Caitanya is productive of incalculable good, inasmuch as it presents to us in a concrete and uncontroversial form the problem of spiritual living. After we have read the life of Sri Caitanya we understand that it is possible for a devotee to lead the life of Vaikuntha before our very eyes without our being aware of the same. And, what is more to the point, that it is possible for us also to lead such a life in this world without really disturbing anybody. Sri Gaur Sundar exhibited the leela of being smitten with grief on receiving the first intimation of the departure of his consort from this world. Sri Sachi Devi was apparently very much grieved by the loss of her daughter-in-law. Grief at the sad demise of beloved ones is natural and inevitable in the case of the people of this world. There is also grief in Vaikuntha, but there it is a particularly delicious variety of uninterruptible happiness. The reason of this we gather from the words of Sri Gaurasundar addressed to his mother to console her. All grief is due to forgetfulness of the fact that no one is either parent, child, wife or husband of any other person. Therefore, there can really be no such thing as bereavement which is experienced by reason of our ignorance of the truth. But are we, therefore, justified in neglecting our ordinary duties towards our dear and near relatives? This way of stating the question is misleading. People of this world are exposed to joys and griefs on account of their friends and relatives. These joys and griefs are of a transitory and unwholesome nature. Their transitoriness as well as unwholesomeness are due to a fundamental misconception of the events which are their cause. After the misconception is removed, we may or may not continue to have any dealings with our relatives and friends as such. The devotee makes no distinction between these two states. He may or may not continue his intimate relationship with friends and relatives. He is guided by the resolve of doing nothing except the bidding of Sri Krishna. If by the will of Krishna he lives as a householder, he is careful to discharge his ordinary duties towards the members of his family, but without confounding the transitory with the eternal. The transitory cannot be ignored, but it need not, therefore, be regarded as identical with the permanent verity. On the contrary, the transitory is capable of being turned to the account of the permanent interest of a person if he makes the former strictly subordinate and conformable to the requirements of the latter. This will not necessarily make much appreciable outward difference in the conduct of such a person towards anybody, except occasionally under the necessity of being loyal to the spiritual standpoint. But his object and outlook will be nevertheless necessarily altogether different from theirs, and it would be convenient to preserve an attitude of unsuspected reserve about the real reason of difference, especially when no useful purpose is likely to be served by its disclosure to unappreciative people. This is no culpable duplicity, as it implies preference for truth as against untruth and a more effective desire to serve him. It is no doubt possible to live a straightforward and professed spiritual life even in this world. But this may not always be effective in inducing worldly people to follow the truth. It is one of the most strange things about spiritual life that one who leads such a life can do good to all by finding a way to associate everybody with himself in his spiritual activities. The form of this connection will not be the same in all cases, not because the tastes and capacities of people vary, but because Krishna is autocrat. It is not to serve worldly people that a devotee willingly lays himself under the obligation imposed by the truth of humoring their weaknesses in order to exploit those very weaknesses for the service of the truth. Those who are not in the secret are likely to find fault with such apparent lapses from the ideal of straightforward worldly conduct. Such lapses should also by no means be imitated by anybody, but they constitute the service of the Lord possible in this world. Sri Gaurasundar and Sri Sachi Devi were, however, acting truly in grieving at the departure of Sri Lakshmi Devi. They did not grieve like worldly people. The devotees of the Lord are most intimately tied to one another by reason of their association in the common service of the Lord. There is no question of the physical body or the materialized mind in such relationship, nor any desire for sensuous gratification of themselves. But Sri Krishna can be served by and through all forms of relationship and distinctive manifestations which only serve to increase the charm and diversity of spiritual service. The only thing needful is to avoid self-forgetfulness and not to suppose oneself to be any other than the exclusive servant of Krishna. Chapter XV, Marriage with Sri Vishnupriya Devi. The Lord continued to indulge in the sweet taste of learning and thereby prevented anyone from understanding his real nature. He bathed early in the morning in the Ganges and, after performing his morning worship, made his way to the house of Mukunda Sanya, the father of Purushottamdas. After the Lord had taken his seat in the Chandamandap of Mukunda Sanya, his students would turn up one by one. If any of them by chance appeared without the tilaka mark on his forehead on any day, the Lord sent him back home, observing that the forehead of a Brahmana without the tilaka resembles the charnel ground, being proof that he has not performed his worship of that day. Thus the Lord took care that all his students strictly followed the injunctions of the Shastras in all particulars. The making of the tilaka mark on 12 different limbs of the body is prescribed by the Shastras as the indispensable duty of every Brahmana. The tilaka is made with the earth of holy ground sanctified by its association with the Lord or his devotees. It is to be made in the form of a line pointing upwards with all aperture running from the base to the top to represent the temple of the Lord. The horizontal tilaka, which is technically called tripundra, is forbidden to brahmanas who are candidates for the study of the Veda. The tripundra is deprecated as being the mark of a non-brahmana. The tripundra is worn by those who claim to be themselves Narayana. The urdhapundra or the upward tilaka is worn by those who regard themselves as the servants of Vishnu. No one who is not a Vaishnava can be a true brahmana. Access to the Veda is closed to a person who does not recognize the superiority of the servants of Vishnu. The non-brahmana do not admit the eternal superiority of the spiritual preceptor. They are Sudras. They paint on their forehead the tripundra sign symbolizing their identity with Godhead. This is the most deadly of sins, and accordingly it is laid down that if one meets by chance a brahmana wearing the tripundra mark, he must forthwith bathe with all his clothes on, in order to be purged of the pollution caused by the unholy sight. There is really no worship for one who refuses on principle to recognize the eternal superiority of the Lord. Those who do not worship the Lord are Sudras. On the other hand, it is the bounden duty of every brahmana, who is a servant of the Lord, to worship him daily. Unless this is strictly complied with, no one must be admitted to the status of a student of the Vedas. Those who demur to the stringency of such regulations on the pleas of liberalism and toleration suppose that education freely imparted produce a change of heart even of those who behave improperly through sheer perversity. It is also assumed that secular knowledge, which is capable of being irregularly acquired, is necessarily better than secular ignorance. Nimai Pandit was the teacher of Vyakarana, which forms the primary course of study that has to be gone.